The press that never stops. They say the Ratcliffe Highway case ended in 1811, but in the original broadside, I just saw my own name, printed beneath the words printed by you. Winter in London doesn't drop all at once. It bargains, hoards a little light, so you can finish one last task. I sat alone in the basement stacks, boxes tied with fraying cloth all around me, the dry smell of old paper needling the nose like bone dust. The label read, Ratcliffe Highway, 1811. Inside, for lines, as bare as a notice board someone forgot to finish. December 7th, a draper's on the highway, entire family dead. December 19th, tavern by the docks, 2 dead, 1 alive. Suspect, J.W. Note, suicide. Close file. No scene map. No chain of hours. A rectangle near the gutter had been torn out, its serrated edge like a cut that hasn't clotted. Cases that have already happened tend to leave more silence than words. Tonight the archivist, gloved and ceremonial, let me handle an original broadside. Amber rag paper, a smooth face, a slightly feathered edge, a red wax seal with an anchor browned almost to black. 2 columns of old lead type. The E's and A's had the weary shoulders of overworked letters. Bottom left, in small type, printed by T.S. Apprentice. I went through Regency directories. Even the marginalia, no T.S. matched. I zoomed the scan. The S tailed too long, the way a hand does when it's afraid of falling short. I lilted the contrast. The monitor gave a moth-wing flicker, as if a wire had been touched, and when it steadied the line had changed, printed by you. I glanced down at the paper in my hand, still T.S. On the screen, you. Same ink depressions, same feathering. Only the sentence had changed its mind. No press had run in this room for years, yet a damp ink smell crept up my nose, and the thinnest floor of sound padded in behind it. Rollers, rounce, paper being drawn, like someone practicing a whistle in another room. I set my palm on the sheet's cold edge. Paper should feel like plant. This felt like metal. Under the surface, something moved. Not insect, not draft, more like ink deciding where to go. I pressed my whole hand down before I knew I meant to. A nettle prickle of tiny needles rose in unison. When I lifted my hand, a tight black sentence had printed in my skin. The press that never stops. A press woke. No, not the dead carcass in the corner, but a machine elsewhere. Elsewhen. A foot on a treadle, a screw turning, hide glue breathing from the rollers, linseed lamping in the air. I looked up. The concrete ceiling had blinked into dark timber, tin shades, the silhouettes of type frames set upright like doors not fully closed. Night put on a different face. Sound lifted me before sight did. Paper rasp, fingertips on a workbench, a bucket kissed into a tub. Ink, coal, leather, sweat, braided with a thin salt vein from the room behind. The warm, faint smell of milk where a child slept. My hands lay on my thighs, nail beds blacked by ink, a thick callus at the base of the thumb, the habit ring of a man who seats coins and bites furniture tight. A fine, sealing cut rode the side of my right forefinger, drawing to a line. The master came in off the weather with a roll of cloth at his shoulder, his back rounded by the day's carrying. Quiet tonight, he said, busy tomorrow. Christmas near, the highway humming. He said he'd locked the door, and then listened to his own memory and wasn't sure. Behind the curtain, his wife's breath and the baby's turning made a little metronome no one conducts. Half shop, half workroom, an oak screw press shouldered the wall. The imposing table stood beside it. Trays of upper and lower sat like 2 open eyes. On the table, to the citizens of the East, on taxes and grain, drying under a breath of lamp heat. Useful words, the master said with a look men reserve for tools that will also bring trouble. With words like that, he advised, it's better not to be involved. Ink is not always just ink. Sometimes it is fire. Beyond the glass pane, a cloaked figure held still at the edge of the dark. Rain had lifted, the street lamp swung. A small silver point wherein I should be caught, and kept its light. When the figure turned away, the silver did not go out. He walked toward the docks with the economy of someone who knows the route. I stood before the press. The oak breathed old sweat. The fingernail scrapes in the handle, layered by years, fit the hands of ghosts. Among our own, we call the heart of a place like this the press. The thing that prints, the thing that squeezes, the thing that speaks to the city, the thing that weighs on you. One word for meanings. In here, it is also a rule. I understood and felt how I would have to live. The more you resist, the more it prints. Wiping the platen's edge, my hand knocked a hardened bud out of a crack in the wood. A piece of wax with an anchor and the ringed letters EEC, East India Company. A black dot of ink sat in the wax like a mole. It wouldn't wipe. The seal didn't belong here, but here it was. Margaret came through the back with a saucered candle, flowers stippling her apron. She put the candle down and turned the wick, moving through the room in a way that missed every board that complained. Her gestures were exact and frugal, the kind you learn if you have watched weather shift off the water all your life. She didn't say much. The night was cold, oil should be saved. Some nights, a press ought to sleep. I took the message. She went back, the curtain shut without a sound. I stepped the lamps down until the room lay in a gray that left the bench visible and my hands honest. My elbow brushed the anchor seal. I set it in the tray to ask the master in the morning where he found it. Tack. A black drop stood up on the bench edge, round as a bead and refusing to spread. Printing ink doesn't do that. The hairs rose on my neck. I checked the door, the bar was dropped. The curtain drawn, rain thinning to a memory. Someone turned in the back room. I slid the paper knife into its old slot and decided with an irascible kind of courage that nothing else would be printed tonight. The press twitched the way a sleeping body shrugs. The furniture slid itself into the chase. The platen lowered a finger's width and rose again, trying weight. I teased the furniture out and turned the screw backward. The oak let out a short, suffering noise. The machine's movement felt more reflex than intent, but it was enough to say my will would not always be senior to its habit. I latched the upper and lower bolts and dragged a crate against the door. One lamp low. The room settled until only the damp house breathed. I leaned on the table and used a small notebook as ballast for the mind. The cover had two initials stitched into it by an unskilled hand, T.S. I didn't remember when I had gotten it, but it had been mine a long time. That is what the object said. A sheet lay on the table that I had not placed there. Wider than what we kept, wove stock, not the laid paper with its water lines. 2 lines stood on it in dark, strict type. No impression marks from our bed. July 12th, night. Do not open when there is knocking. In the corner, in italics, printed by you. I cited the edge. No bite from our tympan. Not printed here. It had come by another route. I slid the sheet into the notebook like a foreign organ into a chest and felt, as I closed the cover, the air change, someone outside drawing a quiet breath. Then the knocking came. 3 steady strokes, not heavy, not menacing. Once you've decided not to open, memory is the only guard you need. I pressed my ear to the wood. No breath on the other side. Only water ticking. What falls from a hood to the seam of a glove. The knocks repeated, then were done. Footsteps went by in the direction of the docks, light and regular. The knot between my shoulders loosened. The door had kept me one more night. The press hadn't finished speaking. It drew the furniture in again. The platen dropped faster this time. My hand caught the furniture, but the bed already held a sheet. I yanked back and read what had been laid in a clean, black voice. The highway murders. Beneath, short lines like bullet points. Tonight, a draper's, a killer unnamed. The evidence will come. Bottom line, printed by T.S. Apprentice. Understanding hit as if the room and I had been struck with the same blow. Those first 2 words would pull the entire city into a single frame. Those initials would pull my hands into the story in a way that would not favor me. Ink smoke tastes like copper when paper tears and goes into the fire. My options were a small number, and all of them were loud. I chose the one a printer can live with. Destroy the impression before it leaves the room. I tore across the title, tore again, reduced the sheet to a handful of flame. Red jumped in the stove and licked up into the wax seal I had thrown after it. The anchor bled once and froze. I broke the furniture and backed the screw until the press made the noise of a thing remembering pain. I threw the bars, drew the curtains, and kept one lamp under my hand. These acts were not to soothe the family. I needed a list. Lists can hold a man steady. Outside, the footsteps were gone. The street returned to wet stone. The night room breathed its old measure again. On the table, the black sat in the wax like a mole that would not wash. I wrote into the notebook with a line that shook just enough to qualify as evidence. Rule: the more you resist, the more it prints. Night: do not open when there is knocking. The press: If I do not print, it will print me. In the morning I would find the night watch and tell them to keep the mouth of the lane under an eye and to resist the habit of warm rooms at the pear tree. I would go to Fleet Street and try to talk someone into printing a warning. I thought to those plans and heard the press in my head drop one notch. Timber, ink, and human habit all ticking the same metronome. Between two breaths, the first useful idea of the case arrived, and it wasn't a philosophy. It was a door and a document. A lock can stay unforced. A page can arrive by itself. What remains is the hour. The last lamp thinned to a saucer. Rain hung at the eaves and dropped its punctuation, tack, tack. I held the notebook inside my coat like a hot stone and looked at the quiet press knowing it was only playing dead. In this room, the only pause available to me was the promise I could keep. The press would not stop. I leaned my back into the oak and shut my eyes on a small contract. Tomorrow, I would do work with my hands before the work with words could find me. Behind the curtain, a woman's lullaby with no name threaded itself into the rain and became counting. Outside, the city shifted slowly toward morning. The highway exhaled. Somewhere near the docks, salt rose again just enough for memory to fix a bearing on the dark. I set a palm on my chest and thanked a trivial, precious fact. The heart still worked. I snuffed the lamp. The room breathed wood. In the dark, one sentence pulsed in the hand that had been printed. The press that never stops. Morning arrived with the sound of coal cellars and water carts and sand being scuffed onto slick stone. I tried something plain that had the dignity of an experiment. On the front step, I poured a narrow run of water to swell the board, then dropped a notched coin from the height of my waist. It struck the wet board, and the sound went short and dull and vanished when it fell into a groove worn by years. Dropped onto a dry seam, the coin rang, skittered, and died with ceremony. A floor speaks physics, not superstition. A coin that falls without a noise is not a marvel. It's a soaked board and a channel. Tomorrow night, where silence lives, I will look for grooves. At the rear sill, under early gray, a dark circle the size of a glass lip had dried. I touched a finger to it and raised the smell to my nose. Pitch, ship's tar, not a lamp note. In the center of the circle, a coarse, dull yellow fiber lay snagged. Oakum, the tarred junk used to pack the seams of planks. I did not take it up. Evidence only becomes true in the presence of someone willing to sign their name. I walked the street and marked a pacing map in my head, from the shop to the watch hut, from there to the pear tree, and from that turned down to the end of New Gravel Lane. The lamp at the mouth of the dock lane was dead earlier than its brothers. Soot smeared its glass in a careless stroke the height of a man's reach. Habit or message? Not yet sure. The watch hut was shut for morning. I didn't knock. The warning on the wove sheet had turned itself into a reflex. Where there is knocking, do not open. Where there is none, all the more so. I don't need a conversation. I need hours. Hours pull the living out of reach of a case, or push them into the story. By the time the day had fully shouldered itself, I had the warning sheet stowed deep in the notebook and the EIC wax in my coat pocket like a coin no shop would take. The smell of burned seal still hung quiet near the stove and dragged a thought into focus. The hulls of ships do not sail these streets, but the habits of the docks do. Before there is blood, there is always a smell. I washed my hands for the day's work. The black in the creases stayed and drew itself into new lines the skin would have to adopt. I drew 3 lines in the notebook, not poetry, a plan. Machine rule: the more you resist, the more it prints. Entry: doors deliver the truth in marks. Hour: find the hours first, the rest follows. The kitchen knocked its knives together. The child made the first quick protests of morning. Shops begin their days with domestic noises. Cities begin theirs with rumor. By evening, the tin shades had gone golden, and the house had set itself for night. The master slept behind the curtain. The child burrowed into sleep like a letter into an envelope. Margaret cleared away anything that might catch a glint. Outside, hooves spelled the stones. Wheels bit. A late market caller gathered the last coins of the day. On the back step, the morning's pitch ring had skinned over. The oakum still lay in the center like a piece of tawny hair. I had tied the press bar to the bench leg with cloth and wedged the bed. You don't lock fate in place with twine and wedges, but it keeps a machine from doing what it wants immediately. The night of December 7th was walking toward us on steps not yet born. Morning smells: oil, tar, salt. were enough to peg the needle. I copied 3 notes in the margin, the way a man writes measurements on his sleeve. Time is the only ruler I trust. Doors are silent witnesses. Smell is an older language than print. I slipped the pencil into the notebook's spine, shut the box, lowered the curtain. One lamp low, the highway resumed its own great breathing. Maybe the night would hold. Maybe not. If it held, I'd go to the first watch hut with the map of steps and start marking hours onto wood. If it broke, print would arrive before I did. It had already shown me that it could. When my eyelids had the weight of good paper, I made a small, equitable agreement. The machine will do its share. I will do mine. If it makes noise, I will measure noise. If it prints, I will write down the hour. That is enough to keep walking. The room dimmed by degrees. In the dark, the press kept a fine, steady breath. At the toe of my boot, a late drop fell from the eaves, struck the board, and broke into silence. I counted without knowing I counted. 1, 2, 3. The way a man counts before putting his hand into a hot form. At 12, sleep turned itself over like a sheet and lay down. In the morning, the work would start with the night watchman's door, not because I believe a watchman can bend history, but because he keeps time. In my part of the work, time is the only frame you can knock without opening. And if anyone asks why a researcher from a later century is standing in the ink breath of 1811 thinking about the hour, the answer is already printed into my palm. The press that never stops. The first print. Morning in the East End doesn't flip on like a switch. It seeps, a gray lilac breath sliding along brick lips and between floorboards as if the day had to squeeze itself back into the world. I sat up with my back braced to the press. The machine slept with the bit in its teeth like a tired horse, and the ink on my palm was still black, thin as a seed skin, uncracked, unwashable. A sentence had printed into me, and water wouldn't take it off. Behind the curtain, the house moved in its ordinary rhythm, a rhythm that did not know it was about to be taken. A baby fretted and settled. A woman hushed a whisper back into sleep. A man's age coughed and tried not to. Mr. Marr put his head through the curtain, hair shaken into a thicket, and said there were early customers. The wind off the highway was fair, and could someone fetch more marline from the salt beef market, because there'd be an order by afternoon. Short speech, all habit, but his hand shook a little with the damp cold. I slid my notebook into my coat. The do not open sheet sat against my heart like a late charm. Passing Margaret, I caught her exact glance. She had slept as little as I had, but still moved like someone who could straighten a half-finished evening with 2 economical gestures and a good eye. The morning pulled bodies into the street like a blanket caught under heels. The road was board cold. The tavern at the lane's end had not opened. The eaves wore a white scratch the wind had left, a line of salt. Oyster women pushed their barrows. Half asleep, talk tapped the stone like spoons at the lip of bowls. Fog off the river hung on the shoulder like wet canvas. At the bend, I thought I saw last night's cloak stand again, and then the mind's own hand wiped the soot off the picture and put it away. I stopped at the watch hut. Owen was the man on nights, red-eyed, beard patchy, coat hem drunk with water. The truncheon hung on a nail. His boots lay soles up to find air. I told him what I'd seen and what might come. The Mar lock loose, a watcher outside. Do not leave the post. Let habit not drag you toward warmth. Men like Owen hear quickly. They live on pieces of report and know where to shelf them. He nodded, said he'd swing by, and, honest in the way of his trade, added he would first call at the pear tree to bring another man with him. Work and a dram seldom travel apart here. That sentence gave a nod to routine more than it asked permission. The shop opened earlier than usual. Bolts of cloth stood on the step. A little board on a hook showed a pointing hand, and the words linen, calico, honesty. That last word on a sign always makes a bitter smile, hung to remind the house more than to swear to the world. The half-mourning sold nothing. I trued a frame, drove thin furniture into a crooked edge, swapped a split marline. Mar mixed ink. We laid out a few grain prices to take an early face. The first customer was a woman buying cloth to line a cradle. She had the changeable voice of someone who knows where a price might soften. She left a deposit, a silver dollar too smooth along the face. The rim nicked the way metal looks when it has slept long in salt. It was cold and sweet on the fingertip, not the hollow warmth of common coin. I slid it into the notebook. The trade teaches you that every strange thing that passes your hand might be the foot of a story. Near noon, Margaret went to market and came back sooner than expected. Her eyes moved once around the room, the way a lamplighter checks soot. On the floor by the bench foot, a small red dot. Wax sat like a mole, a crumb from the anchor seal I had teased out of the press wood last night. She picked it up and set it on the plank edge with a light motion, as if setting down a reminder instead of a question. People who live long in a shop know what has been through their hands, even when it carries no name. The light backed away like a person reluctant to leave a room, but knowing it must. St. George's rang a short word of metal, just enough to tell someone, "Don't be late," to their own face. The master locked early. I checked every seam. Upper bolt, lower bolt, window latch, drew the curtain, slid a crate across the front, went to the back and set the kitchen lock with a brick, counted the draft holes and the boards that speak. Margaret removed what could glint. The surviving lamps went low and yellow, as if the night had asked for quiet voices. Time passed a narrow throat. The first sounds of evening came as ordinances more than noises. Hobnails counting stone, a bit of iron tapping a post, damp lifting off the river like a wet coat on shoulders. Outside, Owen's step went by, a small cough, the voice of a man saying a sentence to himself for company, and then his step walked its way thinner. A night watchman, after all, is a man. 3 knocks came like big drops on tiles, spaced with intention. Not fierce, not threatening. Counting. I did not open. I put my ear to the wood. The other side held a deliberate silence, the silence of someone who is present and waiting. I went to the kitchen door and tested the brick and set it hard. At the front, the glass said tick, a thread of it nicked. I pressed my shoulder into the frame. A hand came into the gap, not forcing, only gauging distance, then withdrew. A thin silver bloom lay along the skin on the back of that hand. Not scar, salt. This one wasn't in a hurry. He knew doors the way people know their own bootlace knot. At the press, paper appeared as if pressed out of wood grain. No coins, no turns. The words came by themselves. 4 short lines arranged in indecency. Open and you bleed. Do not open and you bleed. The corner carried the marking that made me wince a second time. Printed by you. A dry laugh came up my throat. The laugh of someone who has just been taught a law he does not like. I checked the lock again. Upper bolt, true. Lower bolt, true. In the middle, the colon of every door, where sense becomes passage, a key someone had forgotten since morning. It wouldn't turn, only shiver. My shoulder leaned until the muscle held a tremor like taut rope. The curtain rasped softly. Mar looked out, read the facts before the question, and took up the paper knife I had put away at dusk. Margaret stood still, her mouth a straight line that wanted to stay quiet. We stayed that way a long time. Long enough for the word long to lose its scale. Until the knocking did not return, the key stopped breathing, and someone on the porch paused half a beat at a small visual fact, and then kept walking. A salt prickle climbed the nose. Tonight would not be the night, but the night was practicing. When the house took back its breath, we tried to sleep. I sat against the press, notebook under my hand. Dawn never comes quickly in this city. It bleaches fog from dark to less dark and calls that mercy. Day apologizes by letting people open doors, sweep steps, rinse gutters. Handwork to save the nerves from tearing. I carried a handful of dull notices to the neighbor as an excuse to watch the street. At the bend toward the docks, I saw Owen speaking with a long-coated man. The man's shoes were dry, not muddied. The cane head had shallow parallel cuts, a half-shown compass and square. He skimmed and I passed my face the way a man watches water. He said something too short to catch except the final 2 words. Tonight then. In the east, and you prepare for night at the hour that looks brightest. I went up to Fleet Street with a finished account as cover. Jonas Reed was there, slender, the eyes of a man who reflects words more than he makes them. Counting Marlene, his cold pipe clenched like a bookmark telling him where the waking ends. He glanced at my inked hands the way a tradesman clocks another tradesman. In a low voice he asked for a hot highway piece to read before he slept. I gave him 2 words sealed by smell, man and sea. Reed nodded like a fisherman who feels a net come up heavy. Good news. News that lets a city sleep. Is news that ties fear to a proper name. Evening fell like a good knife. The highway blurred at the edges. My ears tightened like drumhead. I tested the furniture. The press gave a small animal settle, as if something inside wished for a palm on its brow. None of your tricks tonight, I said under my breath, the kind of tone you use on a misbehaving cat. Margaret heard how I breathed, but not the sentence, and smiled crookedly the way a woman smiles when a child narrates to a creature that won't answer. Dusk. 3 knocks returned, set to the measure of a lullaby, struck into the silence between lines, not into the wood. I signed no, they obeyed. 1 minute. 2. 3. I thought we had passed it. I was wrong. Glass ticked again. The cutting tongue slid along the edge. The water-brown hand came back. The salt sheen on the skin kept its color. The hand withdrew. The stranger changed lanes. He did not need entry tonight. He had come to learn the path, the breath, the house's pulse. Nothing happened that night. For that reason, I did not sleep. I sat and listened to minutes pour, to wood dry at a groove, to salt bloom inside grain. I tried to draw a stupid graph for a tragedy. Days along the bottom, wetness of ink up the side. The curves peak somewhere between 2 numbers the city already knows. The graduate student in me did what graduate students do. Tried to measure what should only be held with the hand. Wanted a figure for a thing that only becomes true in presence. Next morning, Owen showed early, pale and hollow. His apology dropped on the step in 2 lungfuls. I nodded. I made nothing of it. Each man went to his post, as if nothing were gathering at the head of the street. By late morning, 2 uninvited men arrived. The long coat from yesterday and a man with a notebook. They stayed on the threshold, the note-taker's eyes going across the bench and door frame the way a knife tests the bias of cloth before cutting. The cane head flashed those cuts again, compass and square, drawing a line from this half of the parish to certain closed rooms taverns know the names of. The coat gave me a small nod, the nod of someone who had seen TS in a place I had not, and left a ridge of cold along my neck. The rest of the afternoon wore a weight that made handwork feel like lifting plates. I set oil, set trays, faked the ordinary until it split. When the day had walked far enough that night knew the way back, I begged 5 minutes from Mar and ran for the watch house. Owen wasn't there. His relief said pear tree, as if it were the middle term in an equation. In this part of the world, night keeps a schedule, men keep habits. Where those 2 cross is where the eye cannot see. Metal rang 3 blows on a post from the direction of Mars. The tavern paused 1 beat, and then broke open. Chairs, glass, breath that couldn't find its sentence. I pulled Owen with me. An empty bottle came after, clattering like a bell that wants to lead our shadows. The door was open. No pry marks. The key still in the lock, turned backward like the open mouth of a fish laid on a board. On the floor the first stain, darker than red, ink clasping blood, shaped itself into the outline of a small foot. I did not shout. Owen rode the air through the doorway. I went behind. Margaret tore the curtain back, mouth open, sound failing. I will not describe the rest. Not to make history beautiful. To keep it from adding 1 more layer of ink that will not save a soul. Know this only. 3 grown, 1 infant. Mar lay the wrong way to the press, as if he had been trying to shoulder 1 more turn. The woman fell by the curtain with her hand reaching the place where a cradle is placed. The child. This is the point where sentences should stop. The only picture in life that follows a man into every sleep he will ever have. There are about 11 minutes I cannot account for. My hands did what hands do when the head can't yet file. Propped, placed, shoved the back door for air to cut the stink of fate, brought water, moved what an honest hand shouldn't touch. The street poured into the room with every interjection a city can make. Break, moan, curse, choke. Someone shoved me and called me the sinner. My hands wore blood because I had tried to lift a human weight. The call made sense. What's on your hands is yours. That's how they think. The long coat arrived before the first line went into the duty book. Hawthorne. I heard the name when he stepped in. Clean gloves. Soft voice. Whites of the eyes too white for a man who tells stories. Who saw first? He asked. Too many mouths answered. He looked at me 1 beat longer. The beat of someone who has met a name before a face. He bent to the lock and saw the key inside. He said 1 short word. Within. From the platen's edge he picked up a broadside. Wove stock wider than the house ever bought. Sharper type. The title I feared. The Highway Murders. Bottom line, T.S. I moved. Owen held me. I said I had burned that sheet last night. Saying it was like tying my own wrist to a rope someone else held. Hawthorne lifted the odd dollar from the floor by the counter, the cradle cloth deposit. He turned it, listening with his fingers like a man who hears a beach in a shell. He dropped it into his pocket with the clean economy of his kind. Evidence belongs in the pocket of the person who says evidence. I told him it was a deposit. He smiled the kind of smile that makes you think of Jonas Reed. A deposit on a story, he said, nothing more. The note-taker with Hawthorne was not Owen. His pen worked slow, every word a nail driven hard into plank. He asked Margaret and put down the broken threads of an ordinary day. Market, home early, a candle, 2 knocks, no door, her eyes toward me. He asked my hour. I said afternoon. He asked the smell. I said sea. He asked where the sea was. I said nothing. Some things belong to the nose until they're ready to be signed. Reed arrived early, as if his sleep set its clock by the position of blood. He slipped through and handed Hawthorne a packet, a drafted confession with the name space blank. His eyes were a little too dry. His voice ran level. Bad news with the wrong words in it. He said, is something he can help with. I understood his trade. He frames what happened into what people can sleep beside. It will save a night. It won't save the person who ends up under the headline. The church prayed for the dead before it had their names. Owen poured a measure and pushed it into my hand the way a man gives a cup in a trench. I didn't drink. Hawthorne's hand touched my shoulder lightly, nudging a dust mote's path. A witness, perhaps a suspect, perhaps the next soul in need of prayer, he said. Justice wants a proper name. Those 2 letters under that broadside are a job I enjoy. He left. I stood. Blood dried into the boards like bad ink, stubborn, dark, drawn inward. At the back step, where the inner bolt sits, a coarse yellow fiber had caught. I pinched it up with a fingernail. Oakum. The dockman's packing for plank seams, pitch heavy. The ship tar I had smelled the morning before had fed itself into the wood. 2 direct traces of a man from the water made one sentence. Tar and salt on the sill. Oakum at the inner bolt. No pride door. Key inside. A hand from the docks entered a house that knew locks. Went quiet as an indented line. Late, I went back to the shop. The press waited in the dark like a horse holding air deep in its lungs. I barred, bolted, dragged the crate, checked the lock like a surgeon testing a tendon, sat and opened the notebook. I recorded positions, the floor's small sobs, what the room still said in smells. I wrote a line and crossed it out. Odd dollar, yeah, see? In this city, one word can turn around and become a statement you never meant to make. I wrote Reed early, blank confession. I wrote Hawthorne keeps the coin. I wrote salt hand, silver bloom. I meant to write the child and shut the book before my tears made the ink lie. The press stirred like an animal that had eaten and still licked the bowl. Enough, I said in my throat. The machine has no word for enough. Only again. A thin sheet slid. Under the lamps low, the headline stood straight. Second issue, the suspects. Under it, 3 blank lines, each ruled like a stare waiting for a name. The bottom carried the italics I was learning to despise, printed by you. I sat the way you set down a heavy thing you don't want to ring. The frame was in place. The day was nailed. The door had testified. Smell had led. Blood had written. By morning, this sheet would have to take one of 3 roads. Watch House, Fleet Street, St. George's. Different streets. Same end. Any name I write will turn and bite the hand that wrote it. I didn't write a name. I wrote 3 initials. Enough to remind me where to go without throwing a neck under a yoke of type. H. The man who arrives early, coordinates, keeps a strange coin the way a regular does. He has orders, a model, a schedule. R. The one who appears on cue with a confession left blank. Looks at letters the way a net mender looks at dry twine. Knows where to pull to tidy a crowd's panic. S. Pitch and salt on the sill. Oakum caught at the inner bolt. A hand with salt bloom along the skin. I folded the sheet twice and slid it into my coat. The lamp went out. I laid a hand on the press. The press laid a shadow on my hand like a fresh seal. In the dark, the machine pulled a small breath, not enough to print, enough to promise. That promise drew my eyelids down the way a door comes to when it's been oiled. Just before sleep took me, I heard water change direction somewhere beyond the bend, the sound that comes halfway between a person and the sea. Tomorrow I would begin with hours, not with honor. Hours are measured on foot, by when lamps bloom and fail, by the length of a cough and the length of a hush, by the walk from the watch hut to the pear tree and down to the docks, by by how long it takes a dockman to wash salt off the back of his hand. Door, then hour, then smell. In that order, people are saved more often than by vows. As for me, I had one small vow to myself: not to let any word of mine become the collar history will cinch around an innocent throat. Which is when I remembered, the broadside on Mars bench wasn't my word. It carried TS, but the hand that said it was you. Between those signatures stands a machine that does not know fatigue. I slept. The room kept a fine, steady breath. In the corner, a late drop fell from the eaves, tapped a board, and broke into silence. I counted the way you count before you put your hand into a hot form. 1, 2, 3. The odd dollar pressed in the notebook, the salt sheen on a stranger's knuckles, the paper knife laid exactly where it belongs. Each made a very small sound. Together, they made the city's background noise just before someone hits the post to call the street. If anyone asks why I haven't run back into my own century, I can only show my palm, the press that never stops. It does not allow you to leave a sentence midline. It wants to see you write it out, even if there's not much of you left to sleep with when you're done. On the edge of the night, just before the first bread seller names an innocent thing, I knew I had made the stupidest and most necessary commitment a man can make: to argue, with words, against a machine that knows how to print people. Not to win, to be present. In stories like this, being present is the floor of justice, and sometimes it is all the justice there is. St. George's tongue shifted once before morning had lungs enough for a deep breath, the sound not round, but the sound a patient makes turning in bed. I opened my eyes because of that imperfect metal note. It told me that at the head of the street, someone had touched a property of the church or a property of bad news. The shop was dim as a mirror wiped with a sleeve. One idea made me stand. Hours first, where everything dissolves into a speech. At first light, people speak in their real voices. I walked upstream against buckets and saw eyes lowered into palms as if each hand held a small live fish. The river's smell came back lighter. Not last night's needlepoint sting, but the clean of drying rope. I stood under the dock lane lamp that had died early. Its glass now carried 2 finger streaks of soot at 2 different heights. A hand had felt for the lamp heart at least twice in 2 nights. That could be 2 men. It could be 1 man with a different heel. I touched soot, fine and black, linseed old. I wrote, dock lamp, odd, 2 heights. The Mar door was shut. The street had only just stepped away, leaving the pavement wet and bright as if someone had passed a cloth. Scraps of fabric lay near the step. I didn't go in. I did not need more of a smell that had already printed itself. At the back step, the first pitch ring had gone sugar brittle. The oakum I had taken sat in my pocket bone hard like a wooden letter. The salt patch on the stone still minked a pale silver if you looked at it sideways. I didn't touch it. Evidence likes to remain itself until someone puts his name under it. The watch hut held Owen half asleep in a chair, eyes swollen by waking and by drink. The duty book lay open, the last line still wet. His hand wrote blunt and square, turning corners the way a man holds a stick. I skimmed as a man schemes for numbers, not sentences. Bell, 3, crowd, H. He had written the letter and left it sitting like a stone thrown into water without watching the rings. I wrote into my own book, 3 bell, before the dram. I asked him one thin question that did not require dialogue. What time? He raised an eyebrow at me the way a man does at a small wrong that wants a fine instead of the axe, and stabbed his pen at the page's middle column. Near 8. A night watchman's time is always approximate. I added and subtracted for the empty minutes a cup makes. I swung into the pear tree. Inside, wet leather and beer quarreled. The sound of glass being dried leaned into the argument. On the wall, the chalk schedule for the watch. 5 names, Owen among them, and a substitute, Fenwick, written quick, the end stretched like a loose tie rope. That name didn't live anywhere in the part of my memory where such names should live. My neck hurt the way a child's does when someone lifts hair by the roots. I wrote F.E.N. Wick in my book and didn't draw the face. At the far end of the counter, Reed had already taken a place, hand on a dry glass, looking into air like a man weighing a headline. He didn't glance over it. With men like him, you don't need to. Presence is enough. Leave it on the table, and the smell of a story will climb to it on its own. I went up to Fleet Street, not to find Reed, but to look at a thing that wasn't Reed. The paper itself, the water, the texture. I returned a coil of Marlene and stood beside a friend's press. Their stock ran to cheap lead, the waterlines showing under a slant of light. Mars' broadside last night had been clean wove, unusually white, sharper printing than Mars forms could throw. A small shop doesn't buy that stock regular. People who go to the water or deal with it do. I wrote wove, clean doc source. Under a sample sheet someone had printed trial letters, a long-tailed S cut by a hand that doesn't love the interrogative. I measured from memory. Last night's S was shorter, the knife stroke cleaner, the shoulder even, a practiced hand. Identification isn't to point a finger, it's to save the obvious suspects from the stain of convenience. Back at the shop, I filtered the air. The room still kept a low oil note. Coal gone to sleep, glue. I opened the trays. No A, E, or S had gone walking. At least this house hadn't recently thrown the title that it killed. I let out a breath. The press gave a very small start, the kind of start a person gives when he hears his name from another room. I steadied the furniture, not to forbid, only to bargain. The machine took the bargain in its vocabulary. A thin strip appeared, ink already dry, the letters dark like a human eye after crying. Don't be late. Tonight the marks will dry. No signature. No you. I pretended calm and my stomach tightened. That sentence could have been posted by anybody among too many. The machine, the compositor, the killer, the version of me that writes from the wrong end of time. Anyone could say it if he stood in the correct square. I chose to walk it out. The Mar back door had a little inside nick where something, or someone, liked to brush past. I set a thread flush to that line to learn whether it would be pulled by day. I set a tiny stone at the bolt's lip. If a hand moved, the stone would testify. Then I went to the river and followed tar and salt the way you follow lead type. On the water the cargo still lay in holds. Wet lines rasped hulls the way an old man's coat whispers in a dark room. I borrowed a length of waistline and tied a bowline with my left hand, turning the S backward. A sailor nearby smiled without sound. To them, left or right is an untidy habit ironed out later. I didn't explain what I was testing. I watched thumbs block the loop, index fingers flick the line, and where the skin had thickened. Left-handers carry their calluses in odd places. The S in their loop lies the wrong way. I didn't write left. I drew a tilted ring. A shop 2 lanes off the pear tree kept half a pawn, half a Chandler's. The owner showed me a white candle that was not like the others, spermaceti. It burns cleaner and brighter than tallow. It costs. At the Mars the lamp soot blacked the glass, but I had seen a thin white flake on the bench near the back door. Last night I took it for red wax. Now I remembered its hardness differently. If a man used spermaceti to go by the back, he'd cut soot and raise light. I wrote sperma, dear Doc Hass. Households don't buy that. Seahands know it. A pawnbroker 2 alleys from the pear tree has an eye on his sign. They look at everything. I put the odd dollar on his counter. He raised a little water over it and watched like a man reads the moon in a mirror. A pin crown countermark lay at the rim, the bank's blessing on a Spanish piece. C coins were that stamp. The press at the edge, smooth, told me a pair of pliers had held the coin's throat. He wouldn't buy it. Blood on it. He said, half superstition, half true. I didn't press. I took home what I needed. The coin was a C dollar made legal, not market junk. 2 words would do. Dollar, crown. Dusk collapsed early, as if cloth had been dunked and wrung. I got back to the shop before I had to and waited for the machine to answer me. It kept quiet. Because it kept quiet, I could hear something else. Chalk scratching at the watch house slate. Additions and erasures. I went and did not change my pace. Fenwick had been shifted, his end half wiped and rewritten with a dot, the sort of tip guards leave for each other in chalk that tomorrow's rain erases. I returned to the back door at Mars and checked the stone. It had moved half a hair. Too little for wind. Too much for peace. My thread was cut, not by a knife, by rubbing. I set a new stone and tied a new thread on the opposite bias. Vain tasks make a nervous system stand down. Before full dark, I cut across to St. George's. The side door was open. Damp pew wood and vestment leather breathed out. The bellman, a man bent like half a bow, told me a sentence with enough data. He hadn't rung 3 last night. What people heard was a truncheon on a lamppost, the hour of the old watch change. I nodded. No thanks needed. On the way out, Hawthorne's note-taker stood with thin gloves and a pen behind his ear, his eyes the dull eyes of a man who has chosen to stand with sentences instead of with hands. He didn't call to me. Looking was enough to say we were reading the same page. Back in the shop, I set the bolts and threw a cloth over the trays the way a mother puts a blanket on a child. Night came in sounding like cloth dragged across wood. I sat and set 3 dots beside the 3 initials I'd written. H, R, S. H, keeps time, model, coin. R, words, confession blank. S, salt, pitch, oakum, sperma at the lip. I put a small question next to F, newly chalked into the board. Then I drew a line between H and R. The pear tree has tables long enough for glasses to touch without evidence. I drew a line between S and H. At the docks, there is paper wide enough to carry a headline. Knocking came later than the last 2 nights. 2, not 3. Not counting, notifying. I didn't open. The glass didn't tick. The key didn't tremble. Silence. Not waiting. Watching. I sat and listened until my heart's measure tangled with my idea of the press's breath. When I couldn't keep the 2 apart, the machine slid 1 sheet. The first line didn't shout. Fenwick will change early. Under it, a very fine score line, the way a blade tests a plank before cutting. No signature. I didn't know if the speaker was machine, man, or me from the other side. I knew only this. The sentences that will matter most tend to be printed before I can write them. I left the shop and went the long way by New Gravel Lane to the watch house. The chalk had changed for true. Fenwick had jumped a notch. Owen didn't see it, or pretended. When I left, Fenwick came up from the water side, hat wet, shoes nearly dry, no salt bloom showing on the back of his hand. He had scrubbed. At his cuff a pale yellow thread clung to the lamp. He whisked it off with a practiced flick, the gesture of a man who doesn't like threads to tell tales. He gave me a less than a beat glance, the look of a guard, not a hunter. I didn't place him yet. I wrote F, yellow fiber, flick. Night went deep. I came back and leaned my skull on the press the way a man signs a contract with bone. Sleep arrived on its terms, taking 1 part of vigilance to return 1 part of strength. In the half-sleep, I saw the river like lead, a board floating without sound, an eye with no pupil looking through me the way it looks through glass. I woke at the smallest sound, a grain falling exactly on the bench foot. Not wind, not house, a touch. I lit a low candle and hooded it with my hand. On the bench near the wood box where the anchor wax and the sheets slept, a white smear lay, spermaceti, a shaving as thin as a nail clipping drop when someone was in a hurry. It smelled different from tallow, less smell, more light. The trail walked straight to the back latch and stopped at the bolt lip. My stone had moved the other half hair. My thread had failed by friction. I didn't open. I didn't chase. I let the truth work. Morning would speak. I sat, counted to 12 slow, and opened the notebook. At the page with the 3 initials, I drew a hook by S. S was no longer only salt, pitch, oakum. S was sperma and thread too. S is a hand that cuts soot, walks soft, and stands exactly where a house's breathing can be heard. The hand I had seen twice through the glass slit. The smell that had passed my face 3 times like a lesson said out loud in 3 lines. The press printed nothing else. It breathed like a resting horse, eyes open. I set my forehead to the platen. It was cool like a sentence left unfinished. In the groove where the bed takes pressure, I found a fine dark fiber, too soft and close to be from Mars' coat or Margaret's apron. Likely a cloak of good cut, the nap short and smooth. I glued it down with a breath of gum Arabic and wrote in tiny letters, cloak. When dawn was still an intention, I went back to the Mars. The stone lay off true. A minute bright patch clung to the bolt lip, alcohol on salt. Someone had come back and cleaned his trace. He did not know the stone. The new thread had failed again, by rubbing, not by knife. Sometimes cheap tricks rescue decent people. I allowed myself a smile a schoolbook would recognize. At noon, the inquest circle gathered at the pear tree. I don't like that room. Drink makes truth hard of hearing, but the street's law favors long tables and cups. Hawthorne came with his note-taker and 2 men to set a barrier. Owen sat near the door. Reed stood just far enough away to stay out of ink. Fenwick leaned on a post and stared into the street, the posture of a man who keeps to schedule. Arrive when the chalk says arrive, leave when it says leave. I kept my quiet the way a gambler palms a detail. Questions began. No hammer, no dais. Place and catch. Hawthorne didn't talk much. He listened like a swimmer feeling upstream for a place to put his foot. The usual run. Who, where, when. Lamp at such and such. How many knocks? Any man with a key. Ran out. I didn't step in until a question skidded a bang. Dock Lane lamp dies early. I looked up and saw again the soot on the glass at 2 heights. Hawthorne saw where my eyes had gone and followed. When the note-taker lifted his pen, I put my stones down one at a time. Soot wiped twice at 2 heights. The crown countermark on the dollar. Oakum at the inside bolt. Sperma at the lip. A fine cloak fiber at the press groove. No indictment. Just paving the stones in a line. Hawthorne listened. Behind his wide eyes, I heard another machine turning. One that also dislikes to stop. He nodded at each stone. At sperma, he paused a beat. His dock carries that stock. I watched Reed. He breathed evenly. His fingers tapped a glass in a private measure that has the strictness of type. Fenwick moved one shoe when the note-taker looked. His face stayed. I drew a small hook by F. Habit is also a signature. Owen sat near the door, eyes redder than morning. He did not look at me. I helped him by leaving his name in peace. Some men need the courtesy of not being called. Near the end of the talk, the press in my head stepped once, a wooden reminder. I excused myself and went the short way back, my heart pulsing like a small hammer. The shop was bolted. Inside, a new sheet lay on the bed, the ink long dry. Someone had been earlier than me. The first line didn't command. 3 names. 1 schedule. 1 coat with a salt mark. Under it, 3 short ticks. No signature. In the left margin, a shallow anchor. Just a kiss of a seal, like a tack head dipped careless in wax. The real anchor in my wood box rang in the imagination as if a dozen fingernails had tapped it at once. I sat and put my pen down. Not to write names. Not yet. To draw hours. H arrives early, keeps the coin, stands where the street can be seen. R arrives on cue, brings the blank confession, stands on the letter's edge. S goes by the back, cuts soot, leaves sperma at the lip. F changes early, wears a yellow thread at his wrist, washes salt with spirits. For pins to hold a cloth. 3 walk in step. 1 walks off measure. I marked the off measure with a very small dot. Outside, feet thinned. Somewhere a bakery breathed green as new bread. I set my hand on the press. It did not print another thing. It had had its say for the night. I shut the notebook, shut the door, lowered the lamp, and kept just enough warmth to keep thought from burning. The end of this chapter is not a name. It is a schedule tight enough that tomorrow night cannot lie about the hour. I leaned my head against the plank and let the room count me down. Thin salt, thick tar, sweet oil, metallic ink, clean white wax. I counted them back like rhyme. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At 5 the eyelid fell like a page stroked smooth. And at the rim of sleep I understood the smallest sound tonight did not come from door or glass or key. It came from my own gut, from where the stomach tightens before a sentence you haven't yet dared to write. 3 names are knitting themselves together on a timetable. A coat with a salt bloom will be shaken clean before dawn. If I'm slow, the marks will dry. The sheet said so. The machine said so. Night said so. Morning put its face to the window without deciding to come in. I woke with the schedule still in my head and the machine's breath tucked under my ribs. There is a point in a case where names tempt you. That is exactly when you hold to hours. I took the long way down, so I could put my feet where last night's feet had been. At the Dock Lane lamp, soot had been rubbed again. The higher stroke had smeared. The lower one had been wiped clean outright. A palm print faint in the glass if you breathed on it. Someone had second thoughts about height. I took the angle of the lamp, the cobble's tilt, where a man would stand if he wanted his shadow to fall into the lane and not across the street. I wrote the angles as if they were sums. A man of average reach adjusting at 2 heights means 2 shoes, 2 nights, or 1 man correcting his read. At the Mars back step, my second stone had slid a full grain's width. On the bolt lip the spirit shine had completely aired off. Even the salt looked tired. A single hair lay across the sill, fine and dark, not from the house. I bent and teased it onto the knife tip. A house remembers everything that has passed its mouth. Floors are archives that don't know they are archives. I reached the watch hut as Owen signed off. He looked like a man at the tail end of a storm that hadn't decided whether to leave him alive. I didn't take his time. He didn't offer it. We nodded like men who had held the same heavy thing at different times of day. On the slate, Fenwick had been moved back to his regular hour. If a schedule moves in chalk at dusk and moves back at dawn, it is either a real emergency or a rehearsal. The pear tree carried the leftover of a room that had been used for more than drink. A table pushed a little too far toward the wall. A wet circle on wood where a glass sat so long its heat had behaved like a lamp. 2 bits of ash that were not from pipe or fireplace. White, clean, spermacrumbs. I set my finger to them. The smell was the absence of smell. I imagined 2 men standing in a put-on quiet. A third man outside with his back to the lane, making sure the room was inside itself. On Fleet Street, I studied paper, this time with a printer's grudge. Mars Press could never have thrown that headline with that knife stroke weight. The T in the had a particular top-left nick I'd seen before. On a for me in a shop that liked its work crisp and its conscience untroubled by where the sheet went. I walked in and bought twine. I asked after a font as if I had a customer who liked that taste of tea. The journeyman said, not quite listening, that they had a second tea downstairs with a better top. This one had suffered a cut and a clumsy reset. 2 summers passed, if I recall it. Memory is the pressman's curse and wealth. I nodded as if I were agreeing about rope. Back outside I wrote T-neck, Fleet neighbor, and felt the case's fabric take one more tack. I didn't go telling it yet. You don't put a seam in front of a crowd until you have both ends pulled. By afternoon, Hawthorne had posted a guard at the Mars and pretended it was kindness instead of control. He came to the shop with the note-taker and allowed himself a sentence that pretended to be a question. You print at night? I said we slept at night like Christian folk. He looked at the press the way men look at animals whose hooves are tied, curious how fast they would run if the rope slipped. The broadside, he said, was clean work. I said clean printing can be dishonest writing. The note-taker's pen paused on that and did not write it down. Hawthorne half smiled, as if he appreciated the sentence and disliked the man who carried it. He returned the odd dollar to me like a favor, palm to palm. The metal had been warmed in his pocket, the way evidence acquires a private life when it resides with the man who says the word evidence. We'll need a name, he said, soft, as if I might loan him one. By tonight, he added. That wasn't a request. It was the kind of wish that comes with men who can make a city agree with their timing. When they had gone, I stood alone under the press beam and let the anger pass through. Anger is no use to a schedule unless you write it as a margin note. Beware of borrowed clocks. I went back to the water and did the plainest thing. Washed hands. Where line meets cleat, where thumb meets knot, where forefinger becomes the business end of rope. I counted who had left-hand calluses and who didn't bother to hide them. I marked who glanced toward the parish even when their bodies faced the river. I took in the sight of a man in a good cloak, a little too good for this end of town, buying candles in a measured way, thumb testing the wax, not because he needed to, but because he liked to be seen knowing the difference. He had the look of a man who can borrow someone else's habits for an hour without wearing them home. I didn't follow him. I followed the habit. Candles went into a pocket that already carried a dry place for them. His cuff brushed a beam and left a faint white blink. I held the schedule in my head like a hymn. When evening began to unbutton the day, I fixed the house again. The bolts, the cloth, the brick, the crate. The room took on the same yellow whisper it had worn for 3 nights. Margaret stood at the edge of the curtain and saw what I had set and said nothing. Her silence had the quality of prayer that has left the church and come home to be useful. Mar set a hand on the press. Habit, stood with it there for a beat, and then withdrew. That touch was the last ordinary thing he ever did. I decided not to let it be the last ordinary thing the press ever felt. 2 knocks later, not at the door, somewhere near the lane, wood on iron. A signal to someone who wasn't me. I did not open. The glass kept itself whole. The key lay quiet. The night behaved like a person walking back and forth out of sight, thinking whether a road looked safer in his head than under his feet. The machine waited me out. The sheet that came was spare. The board will be altered twice. Do not accept the 3rd chalk. I stared at that until the sentences around it dropped away. Boards and chalk are human. Ink is permanent. If chalk lies, you treat it like weather. You do not tell the clouds. You move your washing. I went to the watch hut early and sat in a corner like a man enjoying his own coat. Men came in with their hours and their reasons. Fenwick was marked for the 2nd time that day. The inn had been fixed. Someone had leaned over to bring the letter back into dignity. The dot was gone. The habit signature had been erased by someone who didn't believe in signatures. I watched the faces of men reading the board, who nodded, who squinted, who didn't need to check because he already knew. Hawthorne's orders, someone said, as if the slate took dictation from higher wood. I thought about a city that lets two letters walk into any room and stand for conscience. I put my finger on my own letters in the notebook, H, R, S, F, and kept them mine. When I reached the shop again, a boy from Fleet Street waited with a folded proof and the look of a messenger who has learned not to read what he carries. The shop name in his hand was not ours, but the type it wore was a cousin to the type on Mar's table the night before. I signed the receipt with a name that was not mine and read the proof with the bitter respect you give a rival. In the margin, a compositor's light pencil had tested AT, stolen a little weight from the top. I could see in the small shaving on the paper, the pressure mark at the corner, that this was a sheet set by a man who had learned to avoid the nick and T by developing a gentle habit that became a flaw of its own. You can love letters and still hate what they do when ordered by a liar. I burned the proof, not as a gesture, as housekeeping. Rooms tell on you when you leave trash. Dark raised its head fully. The river breathed in. The street went quieter in a way that makes you think someone has put their hand on the crown of the night and asked it to behave. From the lane came the feel of someone taking up a position he had practiced. I did not go to the door. I went to the back and put my ear to the wood the way you listen to a sleeping child, checking for the little whistle that means breath. Salt. Tar. A wick's clean smell. The press made no move. I set my hand on it and whispered the only instruction that has ever worked on a stubborn machine. Wait. From across the parish a bell rang once, wrong, and stopped, as if someone had set his knuckles on metal and changed his mind. On the watchboard Fenwick's name would be moving. The chalk would deny it in the morning. The pear tree would carry two glasses sitting open at an angle that allowed men to speak without overhearing themselves. Reed would be awake at his desk where lamp and window make a two-way mirror. Hawthorne would be at a distance from his note-taker, the way a man stands away from the person who records him, so he can pretend he isn't being recorded at all. I wrote the hour, the time a city takes a breath before it lies to itself. The knock that finally came was not on wood. It was the quiet of a latch being teased, just that change in pressure when metal kisses metal. The thread at the Mar back door would have broken again. The stone would have leaned again. The spirits would come out and wipe the lip clean. Someone who knew how to be inside without entering would practice the gesture until it had no sound. I kept my seat. The press held its peace. We let a man have his rehearsal. We made a schedule out of it. When the night had walked itself out and dawn loosened its jaw, I went and looked where you always look after a rehearsal, the places men touch without knowing they're touching. The watchboard had been smudged and corrected. The pear tree had two dry rims on wood that made AV. The dock lane lamp had one new streak at a height between the two old ones, a compromise born of thought. The back bolt at the Mars wore a tiny crescent of shine where spirits had been dabbled and wiped and dabbled again, as if someone were tutoring himself out of a habit. I took all of that and put it into the book in a hand that would make sense to me tomorrow and to nobody else. Then I went back to the shop and faced the machine. It printed a single line and left the bed empty. Name nothing. Mark hours. Bring a coat to light. Bring a coat to light is a kind of mercy. You can hold up cloth without pronouncing judgment. You can ask a city whether it recognizes its own cut. I stood for a long time with the cloak fiber under my eye and the white wax in a box and the dollar in my book and the little habits of chalk in my head. It is a beautiful thing when evidence begins to rhyme. It is a cruel thing too, because rhyme makes people believe in fate. By the time the street had cleaned itself for business, I had what I needed for the day and exactly nothing for the part of me that wanted a name. I pinned my schedule to my chest the only way a man can, with breath, and walked it. I stopped at the watch hunt and asked for nothing. I stopped at the pear tree and bought a penny's worth of quiet. I stopped at the dock lane lamp and set my shoulder under it like a man who has the habit of lamps. I stopped at the chandler's and asked about candles as if I were a man who had discovered he liked clean light. I stopped at the Fleet neighbor and bought twine I did not want and watched a man in the lower room favor the good tea with his palm, loving how a flaw can be worked around until the working around becomes the signature he leaves on every page. On my way back, the press spoke from a distance, the way a sea does when you're still 2 streets inland. I opened the shop and found one sheet, not a headline, not a command. A calendar. The steps I had taken marked in type, the hours I had held added, as if to a bill, and the last line. Your schedule walks faster than his. Keep it that way. I slid the calendar into the notebook and closed both like closing a patient's eyes. I lowered the lamp and let the room practice being night. When the city breathed shallow again, I would be where I had written. If I were fortunate and cruel enough, I would bring a code into light without putting a man's name in the mouth of the press. The end of a chapter is a hinge, not a verdict. So I left it there. 3 initials that had not become names, 1 board that had told 2 lies and pretended to tell none, and a machine that had learned my breathing so well it could slow itself to match. Outside, the bakery exhaled. Somewhere a bell decided to be true and rang until it was done. I slept with my palm against the platen. Ink to wood, wood to bone, and the sentence printed into my skin kept its color. The press that never stops. Voices from the dock. Morning loitered outside the door longer than usual, as if it required a countersign before entering. I woke in the odor of cooled linseed and wood that had given up last night's damp, then sat up with my back to the press. In London, a day is not a gift, it is a summons. Every step is a statement, every rasp of plank a period, every crusted ring of salt a signature on the city's docket. I began the quiet way, by setting the pieces back on their pins. H, keeper of hours and purse. R, keeper of words. M, keeper of doors and clean light. S, salt, pitch, oakum. F, the shifting watchboard. 5 letters are not names. They are a frame to stretch cloth on. Once the frame is tight, voices come of their own accord, the way fish draw themselves to a whirl. Pear tree first, before the stove remembered its job. The tavern held its silence like a brimming bowl. Owen sat with swollen eyes. Before him the slate wore 3 pale smears as if a cat had raked it. Without a word he pushed over a slip, last night's watch revision, and tapped the wood 3 times. 3, for last night. 3, for a false bell. 3, for a hasty meeting. Between those knocks I heard the old order from the dark. Don't shout while the ink is wet. I folded the slip into my book the way you sheath a thin knife. The dock speaks without a mouth. Things perform their own testimony. On the quay, a rum cask slid and caught with the sigh of a big chest finishing a breath. The bollards complained under a fresh wind. Wet line worried a hull in a rhythm like teeth grinding down a boast. McBride leaned on a post, face mapped with runnels of water and years. Winds turned, he said. A wet shilling falls without a ring. Wet gold rings softer than silver. Gold carries memory. In my nose, the boxed-in reek of crates marked EIC rows. Pitch, salt, men's sweat, and the mildew of papers gone damp under a keel. Don't put your hand to the anchor, McBride added. An anchor bites slow, but the marks sit in the flesh longer than a lifetime of stories. I wrote EIC above the little wax anchor already stitched into my head. I didn't draw the chest. I drew a gear of teeth. At the netmender's bench, boys bought their fear on installments. 1 laugh each to hide what no one would name. Ned nudged me. Any of your papers dead yet? I told him papers die where they've chosen to die. Then I stood and listened to voices that refused to call themselves statements. Some said Reed always knows first. Some said he knows not to go down to Williamson's on the 19th. Someone tossed in the man in the hat. Someone else added eyes bright as water, like pinning cheap jewelry to a stage cloak. They laughed, but short, the way you slip on a wet plank and pretend you meant to. St. George's handed bread the way it hands silence. Father Gray set a portion on my palm without looking up. Some things were born to be carried, not dropped, he said. The 7th had slipped by like a boat without a flag. The 19th waited in place like an anchor not yet pulled free. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the calendar. I took the stairs to Fleet Street like walking into the throat of a beast that swallows words without ever choking. In Reed's room the frame that said truth hung skewed. A brass compass propped the lower edge, and it scraped a narrow white arc across the T. Reed said little. His finger tapped an invisible editorial tempo. The public needs a face to sleep. H needs a case to rise. F needs the street to hush. And I, T.S., need a part so I don't drown. He repeated the 19th as only a man with a ticket already in his pocket can. Don't go into the cellar. He slid me a proof with William missing a letter. A wrong name is a club sign, not a typo, he said like weather. and men who want to find one another in print will miss the same letter together. On the way down, I brushed a passing cloak. Old salt had lived in the cloth, so long it smelled like skin that had drunk the sea. The bridge of the nose left a faint fish scale shine. I didn't look up. Water eyes know their own reflection and ignore it. We passed like two panes that agree not to reflect. At the watch house, Hawthorne read out depositions with ink mixed from wine and authority. Owen was drunk. I changed the watch, he said as if hammering a nail. He inside, knife in hand, ink on hand, broadside, T.S., lying by the press. I set a wet shilling on the table and said salt is light as memory. This coin never belonged to the Mars. He tapped the badge, then his own forehead, then the clerk's book. Hats, heads, fools. On the margin a thin pencil had already written Williams, the same wrongness as Willian. Wrong name is the right man's secret. I heard Owen's voice disappear into wind. Hawthorne flicked the coin back. It struck wood with the dead sound of something just lifted out of water. Back at the Mars I stood in the doorway the way you stand before a seam still red with thread. Lime had thrown a decent color over old bruises, but it hadn't changed the smell. Margaret sat by the door, so still she had given the room a back to lean against. In her hair a black ribbon carried a thin crescent of lamp fat, like a fly speck. She met my eye and smiled a small apology. Clumsy last night, brushed a flame, just enough to be not innocent without being guilty. I set Reed's Willian on the counter. The A had a broken serif like a shoe a half size off. 3 people in this shop know how to fix letters. Mar, T.S., and the daylight customer. That one wears gloves, never sweats, knows which candles don't smoke and which hinges talk. The press watched like an old beast measuring a new master. I wedged the cheeks, stroked the screw, said don't. It answered by showing tongue, a strip sliding from the bed. The suspects. 3 lines to fill. H shifts the watch, arrives early, pockets a wet coin. R prints ahead, owns proofs, knows the 19th. M candles, doors, ribbon. At the bottom, printed by you. Not ink anymore, but a bruise. Margaret looked at it and said nothing. Only her eyes went tight. Thread pulled straight. Hawthorne came in without knocking, and the wind came with him. He folded the suspects like tucking a marker into a novel whose ending he already knew. Enough to hold 3 overnight, he said, so the city can sleep before Christmas. I didn't argue. They locked for the street, not for the truth. From here the voices would come ashore like tide. Voices from the dock, not dialogue, testimony by ear. Line, the bowline tied left-handed. The S of the loop set backward, callous at the palm's rim rather than the hub. This is a binder, not an oarsman. Cask, a chafe mark at hip level. Someone nailed a perch for sitting, not for hauling. Door plank, a knife tested by one light draw, cutting fine as a paper crease. Not haste. Preparation. Candle, spermaceti, double wick, for reading, little soot. Lamp fat on ribbon will not wash with hot water. On the back latch lip, a clear, inodorous bead, sperma, not tallow. Paper, whoa, white, too fine for the Mars. The broken A is evenly cut, no apprentice. Coin, crown countermark on a Spanish dollar, edge pinched with nippers. Wet gold leaves a ring of salt on wood. When dry it pales like a rubbed moon. Slate, Fenwick crammed in, the N exaggerated like a slack guy line. A single that left as a craft mark for the next man. I collected the voices as a trough collects rain. Where the water flows, the trough knows. Today the flow ran to the watch house, the place where the city writes its oaths. Hawthorne signed. Reed, held for disturbing the piece of news. Margaret, held for shielding a witness. Owen, suspended so the parish can sleep. Each sheet half a finger thick. Together they weighed a breath you could not quite take. I walked out with a pass that felt like silk in the pocket and iron on the wrist. I needed a witness that could count. I followed Salt. The first salt ring at the Mars Platin had thinned. The second sat on the pear tree step. Someone set gold there and walked away. The third, a faint halo, rested by the watch house post. 3 rings, 3 notices, 3 rendezvous. Wet gold is not for paying, it is for pointing. The 4th point had no ring. It had a smell. Williamson's cellar breathed old wood, rum, and brick moss. At the stair, a shoe the wrong size had rasped a plate edge, the sound of a blade touching crockery. I stayed out, took one lungful to fix the scent, and went. Don't go down. Don't look up. That sentence is printed at the top of every day now. The glove fragment Owen had pressed into my palm I slid into my inner pocket, not the book. Cursed things shouldn't live beside words. I kept it as you keep a wound closed. At the Chandlers, the mistress confirmed the nose, spermaceti, double wick, church, or money. Candles to read by, not to search with. I drew a fine line from M to S. Clean reading light meeting sea salt at the back door. Reading stands still. Standing still drips. Drips mark ribbon. I let the city carry me down Fleet Street, a market of rumor. Reed walked with FS aid, tailcoat, low crown, soft gloves. They didn't look at one another. They looked at the air between their cuffs, the exact right angle where sleeve breaks toward wrist. I didn't take a picture. I counted breath. 1, 2, 3, to hold the navy stitch in my head. Near noon Hawthorne stepped into the Mars to read the room like a buyer eyeing stock. Reed at noon, Margaret at afternoon, Owen at night, he said, fresh nails and fresh wood. Then shook his sleeve as if shaking other people's sins. I looked at Margaret. She didn't look back. Her shoulders told me not to beg. Silence is the only armor we get. It tears exactly where they strike. Voices from the dock. Morning, second course, were the city speaking through borrowed throats. Cobbler at Cold Harbor. Sole too short for the foot. Toe will scuff the curb. Cheap shoes, rich gate. Cooper, lid with a faded anchor mark. Pitch retouched 2 days past. Inkmaker, thick oil bought off the quay. This black marries well to sperma. The user can blend. The smell lingers in wood. Bellman, no bell last night. Watch sticks beat the post. The change came half a quarter early. The name pulled up ahead of time was F. Customer of linen on the 7th. The deposit coin was wet as if just out of water, her hand too cold. Her look like someone counting waves instead of yardage. Knife against bench. Leaves a hairline as fine as a paper fold. Depth 1 hair. Habit of a tester, not a cutter. Button over edge. A bright tack. Thin metal on hard oak. That button lives on a good coat, not a workman's. No speeches, just lines. Line 1. Route. From quay, pitch plus salt plus oakum. To back door, sperma plus cut string plus shifted pebble. To press bed, salt plus knife test plus cloak fiber. Line 2. Print. From fleet, Willian plus blank confession plus compass propping truth. To watch house, Willians plus wet coin on wood. To pear tree, FEN, wick and chalk. The lines cross at hour, the 19th. Intersections don't need people. They make people. Afternoon poured like ink into a bottle that already had a label. I reached the shop before Hawthorne. The press was quiet, but its shadow had thickened, as if a new man were standing exactly inside an old one. On the tympan, a fresh pressure gloss told me someone had tested 1 degree deeper. I set my palm over the invisible handprint and felt the old warmth of oak meet the new chill of iron. 2 times that refused to mix. I wrote out a structure page, facing the dock with a printer's frame. Hours, Reed. Noon, Margaret. Afternoon, Owen night. Routes, wet gold. 3 rings, Williamson's. Odor, pear tree. Chalk, watch house. Pen. Persons, H, carries decisions. R, carries frames. M, carries silence. F, carries hours. S, carries water. I drew a narrow line binding H to R, glass to glass. A finer line between H and S, paper that comes from the quay. A broken line between R and F, a watchboard that moves for someone not present. Then I set the pin down as you drive a wedge into a door that has begun to rack. The knocks came late. 2, not 3. Not counting. Announcing. I didn't open. The glass kept itself. The key stayed still. Silence, the supervisory kind. The press slid out a sheet, so thin I needed the night behind it to read. Fenwick will step up early. No signature. No you. I didn't ask who spoke. Chalk had spoken. I had spoken. Rhythm had spoken. I filed the slip beside Oakham and the patched glove. New gravel lane, quick as ebb tide. The slate was truly altered. Fenwick raised a notch, the end still wet with a writer's hand. Fenwick came off the water, hat wet, shoes almost dry, the back of his hand clean of salt. He'd rinsed with spirits. At his cuff, a yellow thread blinked in lamplight and fell when he flicked, too practiced to be chance. I didn't enter him in any box. I wrote, F, yellow thread, flick, salt rinsed with spirits. On the walk back, street noise thinned and dock noise swelled. Near sleep, the day's sounds began to braid. Scuffing toe, wet coin, compass on truth, long in, don't look up, don't be in the cellar. A theme rose, truth arrives on wet gold. Judgment arrives on dry hands. I wrote it at the top of a new page in marginal type. Night ate the room in measured bites. I put the lamp out early so the ear could do its work. Shoes passed. A toe kissed stone at the same pitch and spot. From the ceiling a very small voice said Tomas. Don't look up, I told myself, and looked down at the bed. The press kept still, its shadow gathering half a shade, as if a fresh body had just stepped into an old silhouette. I slept a single breath and woke to a sound smaller than rain. One grain of grit striking table leg. I raised a low flame and shaded it. Along the bench edge lay a white, flat smear, true spermaceti, tracking straight to the back latch like dotted line on a map. My pebble had slipped the last half mark. The thread had frayed and let go. A reader had stood here long. Drops fell at an even interval. The leather smell of a clean hand had no soap in it. I didn't chase. I didn't open. Truth works best when it is not looked at full on. Before dawn I slid into the church passage. The candle shop had just unlatched. Wicks hung straight as a punctual sentence. Tallow, beeswax, sperma, 3 corners of the room. The mistress pointed at a double wick and, when she saw the smear on the ribbon pasted in my book, said, someone came to read. I paid with a dry shilling, pocketed a shaving, and labeled them. Out again, I passed the watch house in time to hear a smooth-chinned youth laugh. Repeat a mistake 3 times, and it's a signal, then not corrected. At the menders a chest with a shallow anchor was pushed on. Cord bit its edge and squealed. A man said, don't look. On the quay the taboo wasn't printed. It stood at the edge of the eye like salt dust. Father Gray crossed with surplus bread, spare paper, spare prayers, his arm clean as water. Some names are not to be written, he told the air. Back at the Mars, Margaret was on a chair swapping the dust cloth. The black ribbon dropped down her neck like a question mark. Double wick, I said, just for us to hear. She nodded. Someone came to read. She stood a step nearer. I moved half a step back to keep the sense intact. The press didn't move. The tympan wore one more test gloss. I laid my hand over the mark, and the wood told me plainly. They're practicing. Noon, voices, turned into paper. A preliminary bill, no swearing, just items. Exhibit 1, object oakum at inner bolt, pitch and salt at threshold. Exhibit 2, light sperma at latch lip, lamp fat on ribbon. Exhibit 3, letters Willians/Willians, broken serif on A, white wove. Exhibit 4, hours F shifted half a quarter, no bell, only sticks. Exhibit 5, route wet gold, 3 rings. Finding, and signed H touches coin, R touches type, M touches light, S touches water, F touches time. 5 touches, 1 night. This whole parish is a dock, an open court with roof of wind. Voices are pillars, things are floorboards. Step wrong, and you drop through. Double afternoon. Reed went by paper. Margaret went by schedule. Owen by rule. I arrived a half hour ahead at the watch house. Owen on the steps handed me the mended glove. It was half returned and half kept, the way cursed items claim their owners. And the little remained with me because no one should own it. I slid it against my ribs where odes go, not where ink goes. Evening pulled its color early. Lamps learned to breathe. From near the rafters a voice said Tomas again, and Margaret left a narrow slip in the jam. 19. Don't be in the cellar. Don't look up. The hand was slanted, fine, disciplined. A petition writer's hand, not a hammer's. I burned the slip. The smoke went up like a ribbon. The salt odor rose once and retired. Across 2 pages I wrote a wedge line. Wrong name equals signal. Wax equals place. Wet coin equals route. Crooked shoe equals man from the water. The press hummed a promise without printing. On the evening's lip I left the shop and followed a new salt ring. A cup-sized circle on a neighbor's step. 1 wet coin placed and left. I didn't lift it. I waited. A cloak showed at the lane mouth and unmade itself like breath. The eyes had no pupils, only a flat of water. I didn't blink. Blinking is agreement. Back in, I barred, bricked, and breathed with the machine. It answered with a single slip blown into the catch like a leaf on the right wind. INK and lies. This time I smiled with teeth. A chapter knows its name. Night's work ended with nails. I stacked voices into 4 bands to carry to the watch house at first light. Band 1. Hours. F up a half quarter. No bell. 3 stick knocks. H early. Are on time. M called in afternoon. S stood long enough to drip. Band 2. Route. Wet gold rings 3. Quay pear tree watch house. Williamson's odor. Mars back door. Pebble shifted. Latch lip. Thread sawn. Band 3. Things. Oakum. Pitch. Salt. Double wick. Ribbon with fat. Patched glove with silverish bloom. Cloak fiber. Knife test on bench. Band 4. Letters. White wove. Williams/Williams. Broken A. Broadside TS. Blank confession. Printed by you. With 4 bands, the doc will speak something sharper. Not a name. A direction. I put the back of my head to the post and listened to the press's pulse at ear bone. 3 levels. 1. The machine. 2. The man. 3. The night. They would slide a half step out of time on the 19th, just enough that blood could read them. Highway dozed with one eye open. The press closed its own like a large animal pretending to sleep. I blew the lamp. Ink became a private sky. On the brim of sleep, I saw a black and white scene. A wet coin on a step glowing with a suspect halo. And far off, where the street kisses the quay, the man in the hat turned his face toward me. I kept my eyes open because closing them is how you sign for a delivery. I drifted. Just as I fell deep, I heard a sentence. I don't know whose. Truth arrives on wet gold. Judgment arrives on dry hands. It could have been the dock, the cellar, the press, or me from the far shore of the tale. It locked the night with a catch click. Enough to hold, not enough to cage. Dawn pretended to come. There is a color before day that has no name. In that light, every name looks alike if you take one letter out. Every proof reads like a parcel tied in haste. Every voice reads like the doc talking through a human throat. I got up ahead of the sun and opened the book. The wet coin I'd kept between pages was colder than it ought to be. When I pressed it to the bench, a new salt ring bloomed faint as rubbed moon. Beside it, a smear of inferior black, oil-heavy, carbon poor, that clings to good ribbon better than tallow smoke. I wrote that in the margin. Coat on. Out. The watch house yawned at half-latch. Inside, Hawthorne's pen moved with a steady heart. I set my 4 bands down. No names, only arrows. He neither frowned nor smiled. He braided them into a new rope, as men who require a name will, hours, routes, things, letters, and held up 3 tails so the city could take them. R, the early word. M, the light. H, the evidence. He paused half a beat at H, then folded the rope. Men with sticks keep their hands dry. From the watch house, I walked the narrow to the rooms where the city places people in chairs and asks them to agree with their faces. Reed sat at an empty table, hands side by side like type nested in a case. No irons, no hat, no pipe. A filament of ink clung to the cuticle. Someone had fixed a horizontal stroke and wiped exactly right. He fixed his eyes on the opposite wall the way a printer fixes on a spoiled sheet about to go back under the platen. His cuff was clean of salt, but a fine, bright line circled the seam. Wax pulled and hurried. On the table William lay under Williams, edges offset by the thickness of half a hair. He did not touch. He did not look. The furniture testified. Left back leg of his chair had a shallow chew, the habit of a man who spends hours sitting but shifts weight to his right to keep the spine straight while trimming his pitch. Inside his breast, not a knife, a rule. The instrument type men keep to measure how far truth sits from content. His scratch sheet was white wove, kit from a shop wealthier than the Mars. He sat like a lesson. If you cannot do it true, do it beautifully. I stood a decent distance. He said nothing. Only his jaw ticked on the 3rd beat whenever a guard's foot passed the door. A man born measuring other people's tempo. I wrote, R measures people, sound hour. Measure enough, and you forget where you stand. Margaret entered a room with a low window. I happened by as candlelight kissed her ribbon and left a soft white crescent, sperma too clean for our house. Her hem wore a dot of beeswax, a church mistake fallen into a common room. At her cuff, the crease didn't lay true. Cloth had rested on a shelf edge longer than a curtain woman usually rests. I lost track of how often her breath paused for no reason. Each question from the clerk was a pause. Each pause was a fear. Rooms speak by smell. Old linseed from the clerk's brush. The memory of liturgy in someone's cloth. The faint milk in her hair. She had held a neighbor's child. On the table, a ridge of hardened wax exactly where her hand sat. The chair didn't limp. This wasn't where anyone practices a habit. Her name was spelled right on the paper. Cities keep women's names correct so they can return them later if it suits. I leaned the wall and felt the air grow heavier each time someone tried to wedge another hypothesis into the matter of a back door and a reading candle. Don't let reading become waiting, I told myself. Readers stand long. Waiters get seen. Owen sat on the steps outside, staff upright, eyes chalk faded. He didn't smell of rum. He smelled of ash. He'd burned something, maybe a schedule. His wrist wore short chalk lines. Man who corrected a board in a hurry without redrawing the slant. His soles packed with fine salt, stood long where a water ring dries into wood. The glove piece in my pocket wanted to go home to his. Objects claim us more surely than ethics claims them. We said nothing. The steps spoke, a worn dip where the head of a staff has rested for years. The 19th will be a lesson taught to two. Back at the shop, I did the only thing powerless men control: count. Salt rings, 4. Knife tests, 2. Candle fats, 1 clean, 1 with tallow. Wood breath, 3 even, 1 off. Wrong names: Willian at Fleet, Willians at the watch, another Willian in a torn pile under the bench. Wet gold, 1 at the press, 1 at Pear Tree, 1 at the watch. The 4th unspotted, but the nose knew it would be on some stair. On the bench, I laid it all like a composite pole. Lines between rings made a soft triangle. Mars, Pear Tree, Watch House. The 4th point sat beyond, turning triangle into arrow that aimed at Williamson's. Hours tied the points. Reed, noon. Margaret, afternoon. Owen, night. With those 3 placed, the 19th waited at the arrowhead with lamp oil ready. H. I rolled his letter off the main diagram like a stone out of the road and let it find its use. The lid, push to lock, lift to open. He is not round enough to fit the suspect slot. His name belongs on the paper, not in it. Should I hang the first suspect board now? 3 names that make the public sleep. R, M, O, easy to file. 3 letters that make readers sit up. H, R, M, paper, word, light. I hung both in my head. The city will choose the easy board. History will demand the right one. I walked to Williamson's before night, laid its hand flat. I did not go in. I stood outside and learned the stairs the way seamen learn a chant, by tasting the salt between teeth. A chair scraped inside, someone making room for a guest. The damp brick the quay faces smelled like a letter written in mold. On the 3rd tread a faint veil of salt lay beneath dust, exactly the size of a coin set down and lifted. I didn't stoop for what wasn't there. I took the sound does not name. Cut through an alley on my way back to rest my ears. At the bend, a cloak appeared, not as a jump, but as if I'd simply arrived at the time when it can be seen. The eyes were not silver now, they were water with no moon. The smell was not only salt, it had an old pitch line like oakum. Left hand outside the cloak, thumb calloused at the rim, not the hub, the binder's badge. He passed as if I were a well-trained object. I let him. Truth does not yet need his face, it needs his route. Back at the press I set my hand on it the way you touch a friend about to say the thing you should not. It was still, then offered a thin sheet. The 3rd wrong name will arrive where the nose points up. Printers can't. Uppercase. Not the letter drawer, the upper step. Don't look up. The old sentence curved back under the boat. The 3rd wrong name would arrive where a head is received from above. I folded the slip into the book. I freshened the knife with 1 light pass, listening to the clean whisper. Too clean, because it matched the cut someone else had left. I set the knife down. Keep it near, and your thought becomes your hand. Morning returned the city stage dressed for a tidy headline. Reed kept, Margaret kept, Owen benched. Fenwick moved early like a spare key, already turned. Hawthorne carried papers the way men carry wreaths before Christmas, laying them on each door. I took the street half a step ahead to look. Look at hinges opening on the same beat. Look at salt dried to chalk along thresholds, tougher than lime. Look at walls that paint shadows without eyes. The voices braided themselves to a single sentence. Wet gold goes first, paper follows. I tied that sentence around my finger the way a rigger whips a line to stop a slide. From now to the 19th, I would count only gold. The name would write itself. That afternoon, I went back to the chandler for a stick of sperma. Not to burn, to learn by nose. At night, the city smears everything one color. The nose remembers what the eye can't. She squinted at the coin I offered, dry, and slid me a snippet of double wick. For reading, she said. I paid by not asking more. Back at the bench, I laid the wick beside Owen's mended glove. Leather swallowed candle the way a man swallows a bottled vow. When wick kissed skin, another smell lifted. Not sperma, whale oil balm, the stuff dockmen rub into cracked hands. Someone wore gloves not for warmth, but to keep from leaving fat. Dry hands make judgments land clean. I wrote a line. Wet hands equals route. Dry hands equals judgment. In the margin, S slid closer to wet by instinct, like a child edging to the stove. Dusk gathered like ink into a narrow neck. I didn't wait for a knock. I listened to the lamp outside breathe. At the end of the street, one wick coughed at the same moment a toe scuffed stone, the final smack of type into paper. I marked that stone in my head with an X. The press altered its breath. Long draw, 2 shorts, rest, then again. The watch's rhythm when a parish turns from waiting to guarding. I barred, bricked, and pressed a palm to the back latch. Not slick with wax, now dry. The double wick on the table had tilted a hair. There was no draft. That tilt belonged to a hand that had come by day. When night felt sufficient, a slip came, not from the press but under the door. Cold type. At the 10th, the wrong name will bring itself. Do not supply one. I folded it. 10 is dot count, the last turn on a line before the cast-off. Do not supply a name, not counsel to be silent. Instruction to let the route do the writing. I blew the lamp and slept with the book under my shirt. In the dream, I walked the salt triangle and lit a drop at each corner. When the third went out, a fourth circle showed at the arrowhead. Not salt, lime dust where someone had swept to hide an old stain. Lime cannot kill a scent. The next morning arrived with an impossible gentleness, as if the city allowed one blink before the calendar dragged us to the 19th. I ran an afternoon's worth of small errands in an hour. Band replaced on a cask, fresh line around a bit, a thin ash at the church lamp like the after-echo of a hymn. Fenwick moved half a quarter early. Eyes for no one. A hair of dark wool hung to his cuff button. Cloak cloth near black, the kind a traveler wears when rain hasn't finished. I did not pluck it. Things speak best when they remain with their owner. Pear tree's chalk had been washed, but beneath the black you could still see the long end like a moored line. I measured the way patrons' eyes read the board. Step, 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 stop. On the 19th, the stop will last longer. I mean to end this chapter with sound, true to its name, not speech. The city sounds when it has decided to print the answer before the blood dries. First, the cold coin I still kept. That night, it went colder than usual. When pressed to wood, it left a sharper ring, route condensing from scatter to path. Wet gold carried by several men leaves a little. One man carrying it repeatedly along the same line leaves more. The line is fattening. Second, the toe scuff at the fixed curb. Pitch high, bite shallow, habitual. You don't need a face to know it is the same man going and going. Third, the backlatch lip. The sperma bead dried uneven, candied on one side, thin on the other. The body leans right. The reader carried weight to the shoulder and stood too long. Someone is tired. Someone is waiting too long. Fourth, the press breath I hear through my bones. One long, two short, rest, repeat. The watch's cadence when the parish turns from delay to duty. The machine knows the hour before we do. 4 sounds, for lines on a form. Route, man, stance, hour. Only the headline missing. I let the press supply it. It spat one line heavier than usual, as if someone had leaned on the bar, INK and lies. Under it, a small instruction. Choose your board. I understood. The city will hang its sleeping board. R. M. Ode. Trim and easy with supper. I will hang the board history wants. H. R. M. Dot. In my shop, unannounced. And 2 shadows stand outside any frame. F. Time and S. C. No board swallows both. I slipped a cord through INK and lies and hooked it on the peg by the press. I didn't paste a caption. I let the sheet stand on the peg the way a man stands on a quay. Once, only once, I chose beauty over correctness. To mark the place beauty has trained my eye too long. There is no applause at the end of Voices from the Dock. There is a shift so small, almost no one hears it. Night has moved its chair half a step toward the cellar door. The water's beat has altered by a tenth. Lime on a plank has dried to dust that will leap when the knife comes down. I closed the book. I put the wet coin in my pocket, nearer the heart than the page. I barred the door and sat as on other nights. Not to guard the door, to listen to the machine. In the quiet, the city said the old sentence in a new voice. Let the route print the name. Don't let the name lead the route. Outside, a hat passed the lamppost that always falters. Inside, the press lifted its treadle just enough to promise. The board is chosen. The hours are set. The gold is wet. The knife has learned its song. One thing left. Wait for the 19th. Wait the way paper waits. Thin, silent, durable. Not the way a mouth waits. I left INK and lies on its peg with one eye open. The wet coin cooled along my rib. At the bench edge, a new salt ring faded toward chalk. I barred, darkened, and counted the press's breath. At the 12th beat, I slept. At the 13th, outside, someone changed feet. Morning stalled outside the door, as if it wanted a signature before it would come in. I opened my eyes to the cooled smell of linseed and the dull sheen of wood that had given back its damp. London doesn't hand you a day, it serves you a summons. Every footstep is testimony. Every scrape of board, a period, every dried rim of salt, a signature on the city's ledger. I kept the work quiet, stacked the fragments, pulled the threads taut. 5 initials to hold the fabric. H. Hawthorne, keeper of warrants, the hand that signs the city. R. Reed, keeper of words, the man who arrives with clean copy. M. Margaret, keeper of doors and light. S. Seahand, salt, pitch, oakum, and the steady wrist of someone who ties for a living. F. Fenwick, the watch change, the half-quarter that never lands square. Not names, only a loom. I took the book to the pear tree before the hearth woke. Owen was there already, eyes swollen, a board of chalked hours at his elbow streaked with 3 long smears, cat scratches over the night. He slid me a trimming, the patrol schedule, altered, and tapped the wood 3 times. 3, for last night. 3, for the fake bell. 3, for the hurried meeting. Between the taps, I heard the oldest caution in the trade. Don't shout when the ink is still wet. I folded the slip into my notebook like a thin blade. The dock speaks in its own tongue. A rum puncheon slid on planks and stopped with a held breath. A bollard complained as the wind shifted. Hawser rubbed hull like the teeth of a great machine chewing rash sentences to pulp. McBride leaned on a post, face mapped with runlets and tide stains, and said the wind had turned. Wet silver lands quiet. Wet gold lands softer still, because gold remembers. In my nose came the thick square smell that leaks from an East India chest left a season too long under a deck. Pitch and salt and foot sweat, with a moldy seam of wet paper. Don't put your fingers in an anchor, McBride added. It bites slow, and the scars live under the skin longer than a man's story. I wrote EIC over the anchor I'd sewn into memory on the first night. I didn't draw a chest. I drew a circle of teeth. At the netting bench, the boys paid their fear in small installments of laughter. Ned nudged me. Have the death papers printed themselves yet? I told him the papers usually find where to die, without help, and stood still to hear the evidence that refuses to call itself evidence. Someone said Reed always knows first. Someone said he'd said don't go down Williamson's on the 19th. Someone added a hat, and another pinned on, eyes bright as water, the way you pin cheap jewelry to a good cloak. The whole bench laughed, one note short, like a man's foot sliding on a wet plank. Hats are what London sees when it wants a better story. The ease of it chilled worse than any threat. St. George's handed out bread the way it hands out silence. Father Gray placed a piece on my palm without looking up. Some things are born to be carried, not dropped, he said. The 7th had gone by like a ship with no flag. The 19th waited astern like an anchor not fully lifted. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the calendar. I climbed Fleet Street as if I were stepping into the throat of a beast that swallows words without choking. In Reed's office, a frame, with truth hung slightly askew. A brass compass pinned the top stroke of the T, leaving a thin white scar under the letter. as if the word had been disciplined. Reed's fingers beat a soundless editorial rhythm. "The public needs a face to sleep," he said. "H needs a case to climb. F needs the street quiet. And you, TS, you need a part to keep from sinking." He palm-slid me a proof with William, one letter short. "A wrong name is a club sign, not a typo," he said. "Men who want to see each other in print repeat the same mistake." I left and brushed a cloak on the stair. Salt lived in the cloth like a second skin. The bridge of its nose left a pale scum line, as if someone had drawn a fishbone in light. I didn't look up. I already knew those eyes belonged more to water than to mirrors. He passed me like glass. At the watch house, Hawthorne read the sheet in a voice mixed from spirits and authority. Owen drank. "I moved the hour," he said, and the sentence went into the book like a nail. Key in the lock, knife on the table, ink on the apprentice, broadside sign T.S. lined by the press. I put a wet coin on the desk and said, "Salt is memory. This one doesn't belong in Mars Till." He tapped his badge, then his forehead, then the ledger, hat, head, fools, and in the paper margin Williams appeared in a ghost pencil hand, wrong the same way as William. A wrong name is the secret of the right man. Owen's voice died in the draft. Hawthorne slid the coin back. It hit wood with the thud of something that had just been lifted out of water. Back at Mars, I stood in the doorway like a stitch still red. Fresh wash skimmed politeness over old dark. It didn't alter the smell. Margaret sat near the door, her body married to the silence until even silence had a back. A faint white crescent of clean wax rested in her hair ribbon. She caught my eye and smiled the small smile people use when they choose a lesser guilt over a worse one. I fumbled. I touched flame. I set Reed's William beside the Williams Hawthorne had carried. The A had its foot snapped yet cut with a steady hand. 3 in this house could fix a letter, Mar, T.S., and a customer who paid in daylight. That customer wore gloves, didn't sweat in his palm, knew which candle doesn't spit, and which hinge sulks. The press stood at attention like an old animal taking instruction from a new hand. I wedged the tympan, rubbed the screw, murmured, "Don't," and the bed answered by offering its tongue. A sliver of paper eased out from under the frisket. The suspects. 3 clear lines wrote themselves. H. Shifts the hour, arrives early, pockets wet coin. R. Prints ahead, carries a proof, names the 19th. M. Light, door, ribbon. At the foot the old needle pricked. Printed by you. Margaret looked at the sheet without moving her mouth. Only the eyes drew taut, like thread pulled smooth. Hawthorne came in with the weather, folded the sheet as if it were a bookmark in a novel he already knew by heart, and said it would hold 3 people overnight, so the parish could sleep before Christmas. We lock for the street, not for the truth. From here the voices rose, as they do, from water to stone. Voices from the dock, midday edition. Rope said the bowline was tied left-handed. The S was backwards, callous at the rim of the thumb, not the center. A cask said someone had carved a little seed on its waist. A rider, not a lifter. A door said the knife had been tested, not driven. 1 hair's breadth scratched along the grain. A candle said spermaceti, double-wicked, for reading. The smear on the ribbon would not wash with water. Paper said wove, bright, dear, not of Mars. The broken had the tidy insistence of a practiced cutter. The coin said crown-marked Spanish, its rim kissed by a vice. When it dried it left only a ghost ring, like chalk around a moon. The chalkboard said Fenwick was shoved up, the end drawn long as a loose skyline. A tiny dot flag left in the corner for whoever came next. I carried the voices like a gutter carries rain toward the watch house. There the city writes its creed in ink. Hawthorne signed. Reed was held, disturbing the piece of news. Margaret was held, protecting a witness. Owen was suspended. The city must sleep. Each sheet weighed half a finger. Together they weighed a breath you couldn't take. I needed arithmetic, not testimony. I walked the salt again. The first ring at Mars Press had paled. The second sat by the pear tree step. Someone had said a wet sovereign and left. The third was a whisper on the watch house bench by the batten post. 3 rings, 3 notices, 3 rendezvous. Wet gold isn't for paying, it's for pointing. The 4th mark wasn't a ring, it was a smell. Williamson's breathed old rum, old brick, old timber. On the 3rd stair, a dusting lay like ash. Under it, in a thin crescent, The powder tasted faintly of brine when the damp brushed through, where a wet coin had rested and been lifted. I didn't stoop. I took the sound, the small catch of a shoe that didn't quite fit its owner. The chandler confirmed what my nose insisted. Spermaceti, double-wicked, the sort for reading, not for finding your way. I drew a hairline from M to S. Clean light for reading joined the salt hand's door. Reading stands, standing drops, the drop prints on ribbon. Fleet Street swelled like a market of rumors. Reed went by with F's clerk. They didn't look at each other. They looked at the right angle where a cuff breaks over a wrist. I counted my breath to memorize Navy thread. Hawthorne cut through Mars at noon the way a buyer tests stock. Reed, noon. Margaret, afternoon. Owen, night. He shook dust from his sleeve the way a man shakes off another's error. I glanced at Margaret. She didn't glance back. Her shoulders said, "Don't ask." Sometimes silence is the only coat you own. Underscore. Presses don't sleep. They listen. Mine listen long enough to mimic the watch. Long draw, 2 shorts, rest. The iron didn't move. The breath changed. When the breath changed, a strip slid. The paper thought itself into the light. Fenwick will trade early. No flourish. No you. I walked new gravel lane on the ebb. The board was fresh wiped, but still wept the long end under the new chalk. Fenwick came from the waterline. His hat was wet. His shoes were almost dry. The backs of his hands were too clean, spirits, to lift salt. A tiny yellow fiber stuck on his cuff snagged light, then vanished when he snapped his wrist. A man used to removing traces. I didn't seat him in the dock. I wrote F, yellow fiber, wipe, spirits on skin. On the way back, the street's noise thinned and the rivers thickened. At the edge of sleep, the day's voices braided into a thin chorus without a conductor. The shoe that scuffs the same stone, the wet coin that draws a thin moon, the compass pinning truth, the long end. Don't look up, don't go down. A single melody rose out of the braid. Truth comes in wet gold. Judgment comes on dry hands. I wrote the line in the margin as if captioning a woodcut. Night took the room in a single breath. I let the lights die early so my ears could earn their pay. 2 knocks instead of 3, then nothing. Not counting, announcing. No glass ticked. The key slept. Supervision, not request. The bed eased a sheet from its lips, so thin the sky had to help me read it. The third wrong name will arrive where the steps rise. Printers can't tucked inside, uppercase. Not the type drawer, the higher stair. Don't look up, the older sentence floated like a fish under the boat. I folded the slip and filed it with oakum and the glove scrap Owen had patched. Then I went to Williamson's, only as far as the threshold. I learned the steps by taste and counted the breadth of a chair inside that had been moved for someone who had not yet arrived. On the third rise, upper, brick dust showed white as scraped bone where brine had dried. I didn't touch. The evidence of a place is ruined quickest by the face of a person. Coming back through a narrow cut, a cloak didn't appear. It had always been there, and I had finally walked into its hour. The eyes weren't silver this time. They were the dark of water without moon. The smell was not only salt now. Oakum lived under it, old pitch asleep in the seams. The left hand rode outside the cloth, the thumbs callous at the rim, Tyre's hand. He passed me with the charity we grant to objects. Not worth seeing because they will keep the secret. By the time I reached the shop, the screw stood like a clock, key half turned. I laid my palm on the tympan as if calming a horse that wants to bolt at shadows. The bed didn't move. Then it nudged, a fraction, and offered a thought as thin as onion skin. The third wrong name will show where a head is taken from above. Upper step, uppercase, a name that stumbles the same way as the others, printed where a man has to tip his neck to meet it. I set the knife down. It had the true ring when lightly drawn along the table's edge, the same true I had heard under a stranger's nail. Tools are loyal to whoever knows their pitch. That is their goodness and their sin. London did its best imitation of mercy at dawn. Enough gray to let a man close his eyes for a breath before the calendar pulled itself forward to 19. I ran the triangle once more, Mars, pear tree, watch house, and then angled the line toward Williamson's. At the pear tree the board looked clean, but under the black the long inn slept like a hawser line under tar. Customers read the board in the same meter they used for stairs. 1, 2, 3, stop. On the 19th, the stop would be longer. I wanted to close the chapter with sound, not speech. The city printing its answer before blood could dry. Sound 1. The wet coin I'd kept pressed in my book. Colder than usual, it drew a sharper ring when I set it to the bench. Wet routes harden from dots to lines when the same hand carries them often enough. Sound 2. The scuff of the same shoe on the same stone. Pitched high, but never biting. Habit signature. Sound 3. The latch at Mars' back door. The clean candle drop there had dried uneven. Candy edge on one side, thin on the other. Someone stood leaning, right shoulder forward. Reader's stand. Waiter sag. This one was both. Sound 4. The press's breath. A long draw, too short, a rest. The watch pattern the city adopts when it's moved from waiting to guarding. Machines know the hour before men. The 4 sounds set themselves like 4 lines on a form. Route, person, standing point, time. Missing only a headline. The bed obliged, easing up a crisp pull that had been waiting for the right ear. Ink and lies. Under it, smaller. Choose your board. I understood. The parish board, the sleep board, would hang 3 names people could bear to eat supper with. R, M, O. The history board, the right board, would hang in my own room. H, R, M, with 2 shadows that didn't fit any frame. F, who moves the hour. S, who carries the sea indoors. I looped twine through the title and set it on a peg by the press, unpasted, like a lookout posted to the room. For once I chose beauty over precision, and I hung the word that had trained my eye too well. Evening crept its stool nearer the mouth of the cellar. A lamp down the street failed on the same hitch as last night. The stone that keeps the shoe's scuff learned the song by heart. Outside, someone went by under the weak lamp. Inside, the screw took 1 patient quarter turn. I folded the wet coin into my coat instead of my book. From here to the 19th, the road belonged next to the rib, not the page. I barred the door, cut the flame, and let the room breathe. The city said the old sentence in a new voice. Let the route print the name. Don't let the name lead the route. Under the lamp that falters, a hat passed as if the light were a rumor. In the dark, the bedside once. The sound a patient makes before the surgeon touches metal. The afternoon of the last day before the 19th delivered its stage. Voices from the dock, written down for the bench. Array 1, hours. F swaps a half quarter, no bell, 3 baton knocks. H early, are exact. M called at dusk. S waits long enough to shed a drop. Array 2, routes. 3 moons of salt. Mars, pear tree, watch house. Williamson stair carries the 4th in brick dust. Backdoor pebble moved. Thread cut by chafe, not knife. Array 3, objects. Oakum, pitch, salt. A double wick. A ribbon's clean smear. A glove with a salt silver bloom. A dark cloak fiber. A test scratch at the bench edge. Array 4, letters. Wove. Willian, Williams. A broken A that still insists. A broadside sign TS. A confession with the name left blank. The italic whisper, printed by you. I set the arrays on Hawthorne's desk. He wove them quick into something he could carry to a magistrate. The braid tossed out 3 easy fish. R, because words show first. M, because light leaves fingerprints. H, because someone must look decisive on paper. He stopped half a bead on his own initial, then folded the braid shut. Men with dry hands are careful where they knot. Reed sat for questioning like a compositor. Hands together, palms closed, jaw flicking a tiny 3rd beat every time boots went past the wall. Under his nail, a spider of ink. The place you touch when you correct a crossbar and pretend you didn't. The inner breast of his coat held a ruler, not a blade. A man who measures the space between truth and what the public will carry home. On the desk, Willian tucked under Williams. 2 panes of glass set off by half a hair. Margaret took the low windowed room. The candle touched her ribbon and lifted a clean crescent from it. A golden fleck of beeswax on her hem. Church by mistake. The cuff of her dress had a crease that wasn't quite straight where it had rested too long against a hard edge that wasn't a shelf. I didn't count the places her breath broke. The room did. Every question cut one. Owen sat the watch house step with chalk at his wrist, and ash in his coat from a schedule he'd burned. The tread's groove matched his batten's foot. The place remembers the man who leans on it. But the 19th is a lesson for pairs. I went back to the shop and did what powerless men can. I counted. For salt rings, 2 knife tests, 1 clean wax and 1 tallow smear, 3 steady breaths in the wood and 1 that missed. Willian at Fleet. Willian's at the watch. Another Willian in the ruined pile. 3 wet coins placed like anchoring lights. The 4th at a stair I hadn't yet risked. I spread the map. The triangles drew themselves. Mars, Pear Tree, Watch House, and pointed like an arrowhead toward Williamson's. Noon Reed. Afternoon Margaret. Night Owen. The hour's ramp laid to the cellar mouth and sanded smooth. And H? I pushed the letter to the edge of my drawing and let it roll to its right job. The lid. Pressed down, closed. Lift, open. His name lives on paper, not in paper. The press listened, the way an old animal does when it's memorized its owner's walk. Then, as if to prove it knew the hour better than I did, it gave 1 more sheet without fuss. The 3rd wrong name will arrive where the head tilts back. I heard the printer's joke again, uppercase, and understood the fun had teeth. The day before 19 exhaled a mildness no one believed. I let the room have it. Then I wrote the last neat line a city lets you have before the blow falls. Truth will come in wet gold. Judgment will come on dry hands. I put the coin against my ribs to keep the road warm, pegged I&K and lies by the bed, and closed the chapter the only right way, by listening to wood. The screw held a breath. The room held me. Under the weak lamp in the street, a shoe scuffed the same stone, sure as a finger finding a scar. The sound faded toward the cellar. The press drew 1 long breath, 2 short, and rested, ready to match. Minute for minute, the hour I knew was coming. Ink and lies. I sat up, keeping the wood's leftover warmth against my back, like holding an answer no one had asked yet. The last thin slip of the night stuck to my palm with the cold of dried ink. Rum cellar. Under it, a pin-small caution, don't go alone. The wet coin in my pocket kept to its trade, retelling a route by making the carrier's ribcage tremble, very slightly, right where the bone meets the chill. I told no one, but the objects in the room knew the plan before I did. The trimming knife lay snug against the ruler. A double wick sat beside a tallow candle the way a polite man stands beside a lord. A broken foot rested between 2 notebook pages like a pinned insect waiting for someone to learn its shape. The reversed bowline in my side pocket still smelled faintly of old oakum. I took each thing out and set it on the table according to nose and eye. Salt by the door, spermaceti by the lamp, rum by my breast pocket. 3 bearings, enough not to lose the way when we went down to where voices usually echo up. I went to the pear tree first. Owen sat like a low exclamation point, baton propped, eyes dusted with chalk. He didn't ask, I didn't explain. I put the reversed bowline on the table. He touched the last tuck with a fingernail and nodded, the way a man nods who's used to receiving news by gesture. I slid him the double wick. He didn't smile. He pocketed it like a sliver of light to carry into the dark. Before he rose, he tapped the bench edge 3 times with the tip of his baton. Inside, a bung came out of an empty cask. Outside, the wind pressed the street lamp into a brief falter. Signal enough. From the pear tree to St. George's is only a few steps. Father Gray was rinsing chalices with an educated silence. He didn't ask where. He dried his hands longer than usual, pulled a black ribbon from a drawer, tied up spare prayers and waste paper, and set the bundle in my hands like placing silence on someone else's tongue. 1 sentence slid off the rim of his cup. Don't repeat the name before the stones have had time to fill the hole. I nodded. It was a little nail to keep a lid from springing when the floor under the cask begins to cant. At the Chandlers, the owner didn't fully look up. She tilted her head to listen to the smells I brought in. She gave me a short spermaceti candle, 1 section already burned, the kind a reader uses for a single watch. The smell is in the wood now, she said, still not looking. Where you catch it, follow. I paid with a dry coin and slid the candle into the pocket where the wet one tapped its thin metronome. I passed Fleet Street without going in. Through Reed's window, the truth frame still hung tipped. The compass leaned east. A bead of candle on the table edge had hardened like a fish's eye. I remembered the S joined last night, the left hand dropping the S exactly where I'd left the space. The round, fake halo of a sperma drop for the headline that would be hung straight. I didn't go in. Those objects had finished testifying. It was the seller's turn. Williamson's was still drowsy. Thick beads on the eaves read like a line of unread characters. The cellar door had 2 locks, one iron, one habit. Owen came one breath later with the spare key. His blink was slow, the blink of a man bracing for strong odor. I chalked an X on the stair lip with Chandler's chalk. If smoke blurred the eyes, the hand would still have a way back. The first hasp groaned like a dock pile. The second kept quiet, the quiet of a house that has had a guest in the night. When the hatch opened, the mouth of stone exhaled all at once. Rum, wet timber, metal, salt. 4 smells standing shoulder to shoulder, none willing to take a step back. I handed Owen the spermaceti. He took it in his right hand, right-handed man, so I could fall behind and listen for the city's other left. The brick treads remembered the press of cloth backs. New lime wash skinned the wall, a young white already wanting to run, late arriving medicine telling a late story. The clean flame smoked not at all. Its thin blue light ran along nail heads. The nail crowns wore sideways hammer bites, left-hand strikes. A bead of wax had fallen on the rail where a reader stands, not where a passerby goes. Someone had waited there. The cellar opened long as a psalm to the refrain. Barrels in 2 ranks. Some hoops replaced, black-blue new, not yet orange with rust. Several bungs showed cautious knife tastes. White paint on the cooper's caps, EIC, an anchor, a year. On one, the A in India lacked half its left serif, not stamped from a die but brushed through a stencil nicked at the corner. On the opposite wall, chalk ran straight and broke into a light curve, compass lifted mid-arc. We moved by smell more than light. Which cask breathed spermaceti, which wept salt, which stave lost the hollow knock of emptiness, which hoop showed the whaler's hand oil. The stuff dockmen rubbed to keep their skin from splitting in cold. On the 7th barrel left, the nail heads were mashed toward the right. The tap marks on the hoop ran 3 short, 1 long. Owen tapped back and heard thinner in the middle, lifted once and closed again, by someone who knows how to hang a mouth and make it seem shut. On the floor, a salt ring by a rack leg was darker than the ring in Mars' shop. The salt here had tenure. Right on the ring, a few black flecks refused to bleed. I teased one up with the knife. Ink cut with oil, not rum. Someone touched this place with an inky hand, not tavern help, a hand that composes letters. 2 stairs from the end, a board had been screwed back in a hurry. The new nails weren't home. Their heads still flashed. Owen glanced. I nodded. We pressed. The board gave, like skin under a blade. Behind it, a pocket just big enough for a dry paper bundle. Flax cord, neat knot, scribe's knot, with the tag facing left. I opened it. Inside, blank confessions on wove stock like reeds, edges clean from a shop knife. In the corner of each sheet, a pinhead blot, bruised red, not sealing wax. Rum stained through someone's pouring hand. I counted. 19. The numeral hooked into the rib. Owen let breath out through his nose and gave a finger-low nod. At the stack's edge, 1 sheet sat out of rank, its margin lighter. I slid it free. Along the bottom, a half-letter lived that wasn't part of the form. Half an S. Beautiful, italic, exactly angled. Someone had set this on a galley, tried joining the I with an S, then pulled it back. The S hadn't fully printed. It clung to the paper the way a lip does when it almost kisses. Above us, the timbers sang a low note. I remembered "Don't Look Up" and kept my eyes on iron. The smell of metal arrived before the sound of it. Cold and thin, a parting touch across the brow. Owen didn't raise his head. He handed me the candle and shifted the baton to his right like an actor trading sides. In the cubby, besides paper, lay a slim ledger in frayed blue cloth, the seller's tally. First page, tidy columns, date, cask, step, watchman. In the watchman, column many lines carried no name, only a small hand-drawn compass. The leaves were rum-stiff, a round salt print, exactly a coin's mouth, sat where a wet sovereign had rested. That line matched 19. I didn't take the ledger. It belonged where it had printed itself. Lifting it would change the sentence's key. I tore only 1 tiny corner, just the compass mark. The sound above shifted half a step and paused. No shadow fell. The night was reading us by leaving us alone. Near the end of the right row, a cask wore paint, but no word. On the hoop lay a thin, Clean streak of candle, no drips. I brought the light close. Slick as the neck of someone who wears a scarf. Owen shaped a word with his mouth, inside the hoop. We slid the knife between wood and iron. Tink, small and bright. Tucked in the seam. A navy ribbon strip, one end fuzzed by a hurried snatch. The color matched the sleeve thread on Fenwick's clerk I'd clocked in daylight. The ribbon smelled not of rum, but of clean spermaceti. In the aisle, a chalk line crossed the path. It didn't mark a cask, it marked a stance. Darker at the ends, lighter in the middle. Someone had lingered at 2 candle points and skimmed between. I set my wet coin on the line and lifted. Salt took evenly, no rum bloom. Someone placed gold here to read first. We reached the last step, where the air flips its direction. The flagged floor rang BAP, a foreign tile. Owen pried up a thin brick, a lid to a shallow pocket. No gold. No paper. A tiny pinhead lay inside. The head a square in compass, salt crust at the tip. A ring had snagged and left this when a hand reached down to take something else. The salt ran to the finger's mid-joint. Glove on for the work. Glove off to lift the prize. The hand came dry at the right moment. Owen circled a small mark on the stone with the baton. Here is where the man stands. I set the double wick on that exact spot and lit it with sperma. The flame rose level, without hiss. Level is good. No hidden draft pulling from some second throat, no back door. One way only. Down, then up. We went up. The hatch settled closed. Streetlight walked through our clothes in thin yellow. Williamson's began to fill. Chairs scuffed. Bottles kissed the table edge, 3 light taps, like someone knocking with one finger. The server lifted a rum jug with both hands. An old sperma stain on his left elbow bridged kitchen to cellar. I passed without looking. In my head the object collage clicked into a sentence a tired eye could read. Blank confessions below, a left S laid to the eye. A broken foot ache baiting a headline. A nicked India stencil, navy ribbon, square and compass pin, chalk stance, and sovereign ring. Not pretty. Correct. I chose 3 jobs for the afternoon. First, set the broken A where it isn't Fleet Street. Make the man who joins the S come to me, not to his home press. Mars Press draws enough rumor. Anyone who wants to finish the line will have to step through it. Second, lash a double wick at the tympan's corners so the reading light holds when night squeezes the color out of things. Third, seat the wet coin on the door's light sill, right where the lamp likes to falter, so the road will print the passer. I slid the broken A into Mars galley line, left the eye, open as I had it reads. I tied the wicks neat. Margaret watched and smiled, half for the knot, half at the danger. I set the wet coin on the sill. The old ring took a new moon. Footfalls outside changed feet 3 times, then went. I kept still. The press breathed shallow. The wick burned like a fast reader. We didn't wait long. No knock. The window sang a single string, the way a form does when you pull too much pressure. A hat's shadow cut the pane and held one breath. I counted with my heart. Inside, the wick suddenly steadied, wind gone still. The bed twitched once. No hands. The eye lay there. A hand outside eased pressure against the door, not to open, only to measure the gap. Enough for a thin blade of colorless air. The wick didn't stir. The hand withdrew. The shoes changed feet and angled down the alley. I didn't follow. The road must print him, not me. Night arrived. Mars became the night's belly. Margaret set water to boil. It hushed as softly as the present tense of a sentence. Owen stood where the lamp falters, not coming in fully, keeping the steps beat with his baton laid lengthwise. I stood at the galley, 2 fingers resting on the eye, like touching a pulse. No one spoke. The press drew a long breath, let it go, and slid up from its stomach a skin-thin sliver. Follow the nick. In the tray the broken egg glimmered at its edge with a smear of oil. The eye stayed open. Then he came. Not a shadow, a smell. Dry salt reached the room before the legs did. The door didn't open. The glass didn't move. But the bed's weight shifted a hair, like a horse changing a foot when its owner steps into the stall. I set my palm on the screw. Margaret went to the kitchen, her lamp lifted to half. Owen tilted his chin toward the ceiling's darker corner, but didn't look up. The knife sang against wood so softly I heard it in my teeth. In the tray, the eye grew a tail, an S set lightly, exactly on the line. Not crooked, not extra. Left hand, a clean S, a military hand. I didn't look up or out. I looked down at the nick on the A, still missing the right groove. He didn't touch the A. He only told me who he was, the man who joins the S. The wick rose another notch. The back door shifted an inch and held. A thin black swipe printed itself on the inside face, ink cut with oil. Along the swipe, salt dusted like fine road dust. He withdrew. No sound. No change foot. But the street lamp hiccuped, just enough for the wet coin to take another ring. I pressed the S to the confession sheet from the cellar and rocked it just enough for the join to kiss the edge. Not printing the sentence, printing the hand. When I lifted it, a salt grain clung to the margin. Evidence so small only the nose believes. Margaret brought warm water. The room's ink smell softened. She set her hands in the bowl without looking at me and left a folded quarter sheet by the rim. Kitchen, here's what rooms say. The hand was tidy and austere. Night of the 19th. The name is on the nail. Don't look up. A sentence that had gone all the way around and come home. Owen stood, tapped my shoulder once. Not praise. Appointment. Tomorrow. He would take the Williamson stare before the lamp changed breath. I would carry the broken A and the S sheet. Margaret would not go down. Reed would be somewhere above ground, minding the headline. Fenwick would come half a quarter early, as he always does when he wants his hour clean. Hawthorne would arrive at the exact instant a beautiful name needs hanging. The night shifted its neck and lay down. The press checked itself and held what it had just recorded at the degree of quiet I could stand. I folded the paper, tucked the S inside my shirt, dropped the broken A into the deepest pocket. Between two fingers the spermaceti still clung. It wasn't candle anymore. It was the smell of someone who chooses to read longer than he chooses to live. I didn't close with words. The objects closed for me. On the sill the wet coin stopped being cold by half a breath, enough to tell me the traveler had passed. The new salt ring rounded again, thin as a moon laid on blood. Under it the bed had staged a scrap of blank sheet against the roller, like a forehead resting on a wall. I doused the light. The wood kept its heat. The knife smelled back to the door. The press breathed evenly. 19 waited outside and didn't come in. An anchor let go mid-river, holding us to our mark. In the dark the old 4 words lay where they always do, printed by you. No one erases them. Tomorrow we would go to the cellar, not alone. The join was set. The letters chosen. The smells recorded. Only the route remained. Noon touched the street like a dull knife. It didn't cut. It pushed everything an inch. I pocketed the broken A deep, hid the I. S slip inside my notebook cover, wound the navy ribbon through a length of spare wick so it looked like a forgotten thread. The wet coin kept time, tapping my rib like a finger marking measures on a tabletop. Fenwick surfaced in the hurry of men who walk ahead of their shadows. His cuffs fell in that pleasant right angle again. Wrists smooth, no grease, no rum. His smell was clean spermaceti and new paper. He handed me a thin permit. Tonight, a formal inspection of the cellar to quiet the parish. The clerk's hand was as tidy as a fresh blade. Under Fenwick, a minute smear of chalk. The writer had touched a chalk line somewhere. I asked my question with silence. He answered with a lifted chin. Keys are with me. I know which door opens and which stays shut. I took the paper to the watch house. Hawthorne touched the edge with a gloved finger, withdrew, and measured the distance between me and the name the city wanted. Come on the hour, he said. Not before. Don't tangle it. For the first time I caught watered rum on him. The smell of a man who has stood near the place he should have stood in. Owen looked at his baton. He didn't argue or ask for more men. 3 is many for a cellar, few for a night. Evening turned east. On Fleet Street Raymond Reed slipped through the crowd. No lamp, no gloves, no glance for me. His mouth was clenched the way a man saves a sentence. In his window the compass still leaned east, pinning the dock like a habit with a signature. He didn't speak, but his not speaking did. Tonight someone else would write the handsome part of the headline. The dirty part was for the smells. I reached Mars before dusk. Margaret retied her hair with the old ribbon. The sperma mark had faded to a thought. She touched the double wicks I'd lashed on the bed. Her fingers didn't shake. She'd learned where to make the light stand. She set 2 candles, a fat tallow, a small sperma. Tallow to warm, sperma to read. I put the wet coin on the sill like an eye. The old ring took another rim. Everything ready. Night not yet. I made a short circuit. Church, dock, pear tree. Father Gray sat in an empty confessional, eyes on the small door, his thumb and forefinger rubbed, as if polishing a grain of invisible salt. He didn't add a word. His silence had grown long enough to count as speech. The doc spoke rope. Owen stood between two piles, one boot on stone, one on plank, half in one tense, half in another. He gave a brief nod. The hour had set in the bone. Night laid down like paste paper, glue smelling of kitchen. We reached Williamson's at the lamp's second falter. The permit opened the way. Fenwick was there with the keys, his shift mark penciled in the margin like someone had shaved the hour to make room. Hawthorne came crisp and dry, two unscented men at his back. Reed did not appear, industry's habit. The hatch breathed cold. Sperma went first, Tallow second. One to Reed, one to hold the path back. Fenwick pointed us along the rim and spoke just loud enough. Right side first, left at the seventh barrel, don't touch the line. That line had sat under my wet coin at noon. Now it was dry, and I could feel the salt on my throat. I fell back a pace and let Owen lead. Hawthorne held the middle. Fenwick locked the rear with keys in hand. On the fourth post a fresh notch. Nailheads Uniged. The first two casks bore India with the broken A, the third wore none. Sperma glossed the face. A thin candle tongue had licked the hoop. Our shadows fell in three depths, near, mid, far. The mid-shadows slanted into the old salt ring, like a name settling on its date. Owen signed stop. Sound fell from above. A short step. Shoes changing feet, right over us. Don't look up. I looked at my boots and counted the hoops near my toe. Hawthorne set a hand on his baton and breath narrow. Fenwick shifted so faintly the keys stayed silent. We came to the cubby I'd opened that morning. Not 19 anymore, one missing. The top sheet wore a thin lip of ink at its margin, touched lately. Hawthorne nodded without comment. Fenwick pointed with a bent finger at a chalk line that ran beyond the hollow by half a span. The reading place isn't the safe place. Cellar readers lean to the right. Left-handed readers lean left. The line leaned left. We didn't need a mouth to answer. At the ribbon hoop, Fenwick reached in. I laid my inky hand on his. His sperma scent bumped my salt. Two cleans touching and throwing a spark. A paper man had stayed here too long to come away with nothing. He pulled back and smiled his civil smile. Hawthorne took the ribbon and bagged it. I didn't fight it. Evidence belongs in the right pocket, but I kept the smell. The bottom step. The BIP again. Owen eased the cover. A different hoard. No ring. No paper. A big nail head upturned. Its face hammered with two crossing cuts. The mark Coopers use when they keep a nail aside for weight. On the nail a dark round like dried ink. In the middle a single green-blue fiber of ribbon. The name on the nail, not letters yet. An object. Whatever hung there last night carried the same smell I took on Fleet Street. The lamps trembled. A strip of shadow slid along the joist. Quiet no longer. The tick of metal came steady from a ridgepole, a stitch holding two walls with a sentence not yet written. I kept my eyes on the nail head. Owen tipped the baton against my neck as lightly as a grandfather teaches a child not to tilt his chin. Fenwick stepped half a pace back. His sperma smell stepped with him. Hawthorne let his fingers fall on the baton's crown. His face said nothing. The knife drew a first hiss through the air. It didn't hit a target. It didn't need to. Blades descend to pin other men's eyes. We didn't look. The wick read for us. The nail kept the name for us. The salt spoke the hour for us. The knife told us about the man who can't stand a still gaze. The steps above retreated toward the wood stair. Owen counted in his throat. 1, 2, 3. On the third count the street lamp faltered. The cue. He was gone. We stayed with the nail and the smell. Hawthorne took out paper and, quick with the quill, wrote. Nail under step equals hanging. Sperma smell equals reader's hand. Chalk lean equals left-hand stance. One confession missing. S joint. He didn't look at me much. Fenwick clicked the keys and shifted the second lock the way a man changes watch. Where the keys go, men go. In my head 3 squares filled. Keyman, paperman, seaman. The word man stood in the middle. Me, being printed. We went up. The cellar swallowed its breath like a beast practicing manners. At the bar Williamson pretended business. Full cups, full bottle, a smile with teeth. Margaret was not there. I knew where. Home. By the press, sperma set just high enough to read a slip and not high enough for a knife to see. Outside, the wind turned. A cloak split the alley mouth and did not enter. A fingertip drew a faint mark on the glass. One line, one point, the reader's sign. I ducked and let it lie, an undeveloped plate. Mars met us with warm oil. The left wick burned half a knuckle lower than the right. The bowl water had cooled. On the table, a fresh slip from the belly of the press lay crooked. The nail keeps the name. The candle keeps the eye. The salt keeps the route. At the bottom, the same 4 words. I didn't smile now. Owen took the step in the doorway, as custom. Hawthorne nodded, carried away the ribbon and the papers. He'd braid them into something a parish can sleep on. Fenwick shifted keys to a different ring, tucked them in, and tipped his hat precisely. His sperma scent walked out like a prayer without a god. That left Margaret and me. The room breathed again. She sat the chair the way night sets a pillow. Light enough to read. I set the broken down between the old fingerprints. She touched the letter's edge without touching its face. A small nod. She understood that letters have weight. Outside, the lamp faltered a 3rd time. The press took half a step. The slip in the tray edged a line. I didn't touch it to read it. Don't be in the cellar. Don't look up. Don't be alone. 3 knots on 1 cord. I blew out the tallow and let the sperma measure shadow. Margaret rose. The sheen on her ribbon ran like a thin knife. Naturally, the night set her where the candle should stand, between reading and living. I knew the next move would come from her, not as speech, as flame. I bundled the cellar finds in coarse cloth and stowed them deep in the press frame. The wet coin returned to the sill. The broken A went to the front pocket. The I.S. slip slid under the notebook cover. I wrote 3 dry lines. Nail equals hangs the name, object, not letters. Left hand equals joins S, reads by sperma. Shifted key equals opens the right door at the wrong time. I put the pen down. Margaret fed the lamp a little oil, an act not found in any manual. Someone had spoken to her in the kitchen. The light didn't grow. Its tone changed, just enough to hear a knife from far off. I sat with the wood. The press was warm. The night didn't pound. It leaned. The crimes map lay plain on the table. Cellar nail knife name. The people set themselves around that map like shadows showing up to their parts. Hawthorne would need a beautiful proof. Fenwick would need a clean key. Reed would need a handsome line. Owen would need a decent night. I needed a candle that would not go out. Outside, the street lamp changed breath for the last time. A knock like wind, not knuckles. Not an invitation. Not a threat. A reminder. On the hour. I didn't open. Margaret didn't look up. The press didn't step. We let the night pass the way you let a sentence you finished drift before you shut the book. When the steps left the stoop, the wet coin stopped being cold by another half-breath. The new ring shone thin as a false halo for a nameless saint. I blew the light. In the dark, the 4 old words didn't need flame. Printed by you. The night nodded. 19 waited by Williamson's like an anchor sunk in the riverbed. Just as my lids touched, a very thin line of light went from kitchen to door. Margaret carried the candle out without a word and stood the sperma on a wooden peg by the door so the flame sat at eye height. Perhaps the night needed to see our faces at exactly that level. Perhaps the night needed a candle keeper. I knew the next placement in the sentence. The light goes before the name this time, not after. And the person who would set it there tonight would not be me. Night closed slowly. The press counted itself. On the table, a thin sheet rested one edge against the roller like a brow against a wall. As I went under, a light smell of baking folded into the ink. The city's life going on despite the crime's calendar. I kept 3 pictures for dawn. The nail in the cellar, the S laid clean to the eye, and a candle held at eye height in Margaret's hand. In the morning, we would carry a light back down the steps. Not alone. The route had written itself. The name was waiting for the proper nail. And the light, this time, would go first. The candle girl. Morning flaked off the night like a thin rind of wax lifted from a candle's heart. The room hadn't changed in any way that mattered. Only the pale salt halo on the press bed had faded a shade, and the cool, clean trace of spermaceti had separated itself from the older smell of linseed oil. The 2 cautions from the 7th still lay somewhere in the wood. Don't go down the cellar. Don't look up, like a house's long, sleeping breath. I held my hands to the early light and found a clear bead of wax hooked to the fine cut along the bench edge, the kind of candle no poorhouse would burn. When Margaret drew the curtain and stepped out, the black ribbon in her hair had been wiped clean of lamp fat. Yet that fresh smell of spermaceti still clung, a note not native to this house. We didn't greet one another. In London, the living look up only to take attendance before the day. I filed the facts by sight. She had been asked to carry the light. The coin that paid for it had once been wet. Reading mattered more than seeing, and the person behind her wasn't one of the street's regulars. Trust and suspicion can stand together. The trade teaches you to keep both, because every story holds two inks. To learn the path of the flame, I turned into the chandlers at the end of the lane. Tallow's thick reek braided with the honey of beeswax and the cool cleanliness of spermaceti, three smells refusing to mingle, each in its own corner. I begged a workboard, set 4 short spermaceti candles with double wicks, lit them, and breathed a doordraft across them to mimic a latch turned just so. When the drops fell, their rhythm and lean sketched a triangle. That triangle matched the angle of the Mars back door if the key were turned a quarter. In the day book under the counter, Margaret, missing an A, stood beside the 6th. The note coin, wet, was penciled in a faint blue that made the shopkeeper remember. Together, 3 arrows. Plain, she did carry the light. By inference, someone gloved walked with her. By inference, a key had turned. No jemmy on the wood. At the watch house, Hawthorne stacked the pieces into procedure. Candles, wicks, coin. The way his eye moved across a cluster of keys said more than his voice. Every door opens. The price just differs. Owen's name slipped down the chalkboard another notch. The fatigue of a nightman turned into a cold mark. The city was laying out a communal sleep. A pretty woman held overnight to calm talk, a confession form waiting for a name, and a few drops of wax to be typed into sentences. St. George's rebalanced the day with silence. Father Gray asked nothing when I set the double-wicked spermaceti on the table. He pressed a fingertip into its edge, leaving a shallow crescent, a seal for whoever would have to carry a secret. The quiet was blessed, and, at the same time, made responsible. Down at the river, Williamson's breathed through its cellar. Rum rose like a late sleep. On the stair rail, clear grains of wax lay along a line that copied the wind triangle exactly. Nobody had to say it. The steps had been opened, a candle had passed, and a familiar salt body had slipped down. Ned tipped his chin the dockside way. That light didn't belong to the docks. It only crossed them so the story would be on time. Back in the shop, I built a small altar on the press bed. The letter A with its broken serif, the key for the man who edits names, a bowline tied backwards, a left-handed habit, the wet coin, the path of truth, and a blind, stumpy candle with a faint EIC anchor scratched in its side. For things set in a diamond. In the middle, the blank the press had eased out last night, a pause waiting to be filled. Margaret came back from the watch house with the look of someone who has learned how to say enough to live. In her hand, a dented tin saucer for a candle, its inner rim nicked in a half-open compass. This had sat at the back door on the night of light. She didn't plead innocence. She put the thing where it belonged. Neither of us mistook her for the culprit. She carried the light. What she carried into the house wasn't fire. It was the hour. The hour is a knife's favorite, the moment it arrives. Across Fleet Street, Jonas Reed kept time with type. His frame still hung truth upside down, its corner pinned with a compass, and the room still smelled clean. On the galley, a line I. S had just been lifted. The S was the tidy, slanted hand of a lefty, as clean as parade steel. Under the plank, a hairline of salt had crusted. Someone not Reed came here to join letters, using his room to lock a sentence before letting it out to the street. The broken A in my pocket was still the bait. The man who repeats Willians 3 times signs himself. Elsewhere, the unknown sailor stayed outside the sentences. He didn't knock. He left a blind candle scratched with an anchor. He left a measurement of sea and store. His salt no longer shouted. It had become skin, what you smell in people who live too long in wind. There wasn't enough to name him the killer. There was enough to know he knew the route of wet gold. The press didn't argue. It only stamped once, an old piece of oak putting down a small period. On the blank between the 4 items, letters rose faintly without a hand, a headline for the girl with the candle, and a small reminder beneath. She didn't carry fire. She carried hour. In the margin, as always, the familiar 4 words set themselves, printed by you. We had enough for the next night. Wick, key, coin, knife, name. I ran them in the order I'd lock for me. Double wick to read, not to light the room. Keys that turn more naturally from inside with the left. Wet coin rings salt when it rests on wood. Knives test first with a hairline on glass where the type's reflection sits. And there it was, last night. Those scraps all pointed to one place, the rum cellar. Before I doused the lamp, I tested my own flame, held the candle Father Gray had thumb sealed. Felt, however we spoke it, the girl wasn't the blaze of the case, she was the minute hand. The hour hand rested on a bunch of keys. The piece of night lived under the stairs. The man of letters would be forced to walk beside the light, if only to witness on time. The city changed voices after midnight. Timbers breathed, a neighbor's till ticked, a knife spoke to mice in its teeth. A figure slid past the pane without stopping. The candle she'd left burned low. The drops fell in pairs, the two beats inside a name cut in half. At that grade of light you can see the way, but not the face. That was right. Before sleep, I reset the altar. The broken A crosswise like a bridge, the backward bowline keeping a corner, the wet coin holding center, the blind candle wedging the white sheet. On the paper the press had ghosted enough letters to title her chapter. I understood. If we go down, we don't go alone. Light will go with us. And I understood. Don't look up is still the safest counsel. There's always a thin edge waiting at the top step. Dawn will seep in the way it always does. No one needs to call for begin. You lay a hand on the oak, feel one stroke of the machine, and know the hour has arrived. What the flame remembered yesterday, the hands must learn today. Light remembers the route. People remember the price. And the candle girl, when it's her turn, will stand between the two doors like a mark on the dial, forcing every city sound to pass through her to keep time. Fire has its own memory. It records wind by the droplet, hands by the skin of wax, hours by that hard-to-hear heart in the wick. Once I knew that, the room changed parts. The press was no longer the center. The middle of the story shifted to a dented saucer, a tied wick, a glassy seed of spermaceti, and the quiet bloom of salt across the bench. The crime itself lay dry like a finished print. The light had left its scaffolding in the house, visible if you bent, touched what others called dirty, and kept still long enough to hear a candle burn. Start with the hand. On the river they separate right from left by knots. In a house you can do it by candles. A double wick isn't simply two threads twisted. It's the habit of readers, of people who fear black smoke in their text, who want a flame both high and quiet. When the candle entered the Mars rooms, the wick said somebody meant to read, not search. The drips slant along the door's draft said nobody flung the door wide. The key turned a quarter, an old move, just enough to let the street's air choose the flame's lean. The craft is in not letting the draft turn to weather. It gives you steady drops, no flare. Whoever stood behind this understood the difference between the light of labor and the light of right. I wrote that in the margin of my mind. Then hour. Not church hour, house hour. Houses with babies sleep at their own times. Shops fold their doors in their own rhythm. Lamps dry their oil on their own schedule. Anyone used to these houses along the highway knows when the porch boards stop complaining, when the fire pans down, when milk sets a different sound in a child's throat. The flame arrived at the day's hollow, the slump of a house. The girl with the wick may not have known that. The one who walked her did. On the crime's map, she is the minute hand. The hour hand wears gloves. Smell next. You can't mistake spermaceti for tallow. Clean, cool, lasting, and when it lifts it leaves a fine string of music in the nose. The docs don't hate it. They mistrust it. It smells of sea money, not sea sweat. In alleys with presses, it's the odor of correction rooms. It proves red under smokeless light. Even poor editors on Fleet Street stretch for it, because clean light speaks kinder to the public than dirty. The Mars house had no claim on either world, yet on the seventh that smell walked in like a guest who knew both rules. Red clean, act dirty. Thread smell to hour, drips to draft, wicks to hands, and the night's regularity shows. The first 3 knocks didn't ask for the latch. They checked whether anyone inside was still awake. The second time, when the knuckle touched glass, the room's quiet answered yes. And the key in the throat of the lock sounded like a half-breath. Nothing happened that night, but the rig was complete. Light, air, key. knife, name. The next day, Hawthorne swapped light for paper, air for law, key for signature, knife for deposition, name for ink. That order lets the city sleep. It doesn't change the night. It changes the units. Now the girl. The street gave her the easiest tag, the Candle Girl. Not because she always carried one, but because rooms she passed through began to speak in light. In the Mars house, people remember the black ribbon. Maid's gear meant to stay tidy, not pretty. After the killing, the ribbon earned a second job, a strip for guessing her route by the fine dust of wax it caught. At the watch house, they tried to lash her to carrying light means carrying guilt. In church, they pressed a thumb into a candle as if to bless carrying light, without asking who put it in her hand. Both places used her as a surface, where light touches, where writing touches. Between those two touches, she lived on hour, arrive when called, leave once she had warned. People forget that on time is its own skill. She doesn't say much. When she must, she uses the verbs of work, pass, place, light, ease, turn, withdraw, go. Small verbs. In a row, they make a machine just sturdy enough for someone behind her to run. I didn't press her, not from fear, but because every extra question adds a new knot to her name. In this city, the one with fewer strings lives longer. We should pass Fleet Street again to see how the trade recycles light. In Reed's room, truth still hangs upside down, a private joke for newspaper nerves. The constant drift of spermaceti there draws a counter route. Light leaves the house, enters the composing room, becomes ink, and comes back to the street as type. The broken A is the physical proof. Moving from case to case, it leaves the same notch across two Willians/Willians, proving that repeated wrong is a way of recognition. The left hand that set the S into I doesn't need a face. That S's military neatness signs for him. At the threshold of that temple of type, the left hand touches a Fermi and reassures a nameless soft glove. When light shakes hands with letters, a candle isn't a candle, it's a pen that shines. Down the river again, Williamson's breathes by barrels. By day a store, by night a place to lay a story on its side. Rum varnishes nerves. Wetwood swells and ticks the weather. At the stair's shoulder, wax grains on the rail align into isodrops, proving the gloved arm had to stop at that exact step to listen and wait the hour. A fogged watchman, pulled off his own schedule, stands above, hand too dull to split Rum's breathing from a human's. On the second-story glass pane, the knife's test lies exactly where the letter H reflects. Knives like to begin where a letter sneezes. The line that knots these points runs through the watch house. On that table, they do Light's paperwork. The yes, no, came, went read into ink. Spermaceti renamed trace at scene. The double wick renamed instrument for reading. The wet coin relabeled suspicious object. The hour transferred into window of offense. The girl sits straight and learns to talk, just enough. The clerk looks more at the slant of her hand than at her words. The officer from the docks asks like a man pulling rope. You tug one, the rest unlace. This town understands a coal poker better than a whip, and it interrogates accordingly. A small altar of light sits on the press bed, not for prayer, for measurement. The broken A anchors the world of print. The left-hand bowline anchors seamanship. The wet coin anchors route. The blind candle with the anchor scratches anchors supply. In their middle the blank, not emptiness, but the story's emulsion. The press, usually a creature of cheeks and screw, acts like a night camera. It ghosts type onto that surface in a gray only printers can read. When the Candle Girl surfaces, the footline, she did not carry fire. She carried hour, resets the props, hour before knife. Deeper in, the light gives the case its small politics. Spermaceti isn't for everyone. It travels by network. Church, composing rooms, a few private parlors. Not every coin is wet. It's what if it came off a cask or out of a pocket turned on the quay. Compass and square don't appear by chance. They hide in a cuff seam, in the way a frame gets pinned to a wall, in the choice to sign with S instead of any other letter. The EIC anchor, faint on the blind candle, isn't for candlers. It points through store, dock, hall, news. Another layer sits in cleanliness. Lamp fat stains a ribbon differently from spermaceti. The mark on her black band didn't puff or stink of hearth. It lay sleek, the way a double wick melts. I held the strip to a low light and watched how little it took the glow, the kind of light that favors closed surfaces. In London, a closed surface is a virtue. Talk little, keep shut, thin smile. The ribbon becomes a closed diagram for the case. Pull one point and the others draw in. Price, too, has its ledgers. The girl's silence is priced in one night at the watch house, a sheaf of questions, a priest's touch, a dockman's assurance that nobody saw. The man of letters pays with the right to pass the gate unchallenged, bought by setting the wrong name in the frame. The night watch pays with an empty bottle at the pear tree and a knot coiled in a pocket. All are paid an hour. Money comes after type. When the isodrops on the Williamson's stair matched the wind triangle on the Chandler's board, light's exactness could be reenacted on paper. I set 4 spermacedes in the stairs ratio, cracked the door, counted the fall, sketched the figure, and laid it over a fast plan of the Mars back. The crossing sat exactly where the tin saucer had been. Father Gray's thumb dent, a neat half-moon, matched the tiny nail dent in the scrap I'd picked off the press bed. Light and hand had met. The rest was for the knife to choose. Don't skip the salt structure. Pale halos on the bench grew like a waning moon. A coin left long enough left a crystalline ridge you could thumb, and water drew out of the wood at the wettest hour, just before light. That's when a house's sleep opens a crack for footsteps, latch whispers, a bolt's small shiver. The knife's preview carries a smell cleaner than salt, metal just out of water. Near the 19th, that scent had already slipped in like a half-sentence without a subject. The girl passed through it without remark. Not from ignorance, but because there's no safe clause to set after smell. Outside, the unknown sailor kept the correct distance. No face, only units, blind candles, lashings, salt scales, the way a short shoe scuffs stone. Each time he passed, light in his eyes failed to surface, only 2 flat flares like water. To me, he was a dock function, swappable with any man using the same smell, hand, and route. No face is a kind of answer. It keeps the crime an algorithm. It's easy to forget the quiet ones. The chandler who only tips her head to listen. The clerk who adds or subtracts a hook for column neatness. The sacristan who dusts lime down his trouser after wiping stone. The infant in the Mars rooms who shifts his breath just before the candle drops. Each is grit on sandpaper. The ink doesn't blacken on them, but the letters hold. When you reread, they bring the gray up. I tried ordering the props by time instead of guilt. First the key forgotten in the lock, from morning. Then the double wick, preparation. The triangle of drips through the draft. The wet coin pegging the story. The test cut on the pane. The press giving an ungiven broadside. And last the blank, the pale cheek of a crime. In that chain the candle girl appears twice, placing and withdrawing. Both are lawful parts of any day. They turn into links only when you lay them over dock hour. And how light and knife treat a face. The blade waits above the last step. The light looks up from below. If you raise your eyes, the pupil will catch a silver line before the skull feels pain. If you keep them down, the light will pour along the cheek like oil, leaving no reflex. I chose not to look up, so the light's line would not break. She was told not to look up, so the knife would have a way. In that geometry, kindness is sometimes the path of harm. Night thickened. The 19th sucked air out of the rooms. The press breathed shallow, the big beast tensing before a spring. The white in the altar's middle stayed still. Its stillness held the rest. The 8 didn't slide. The knot didn't roll. The coin didn't shiver. The blind candle didn't click. Of the 4, the coin said least, but the salt ring around it widened with the damp, working as a water clock for anyone patient enough. By how far that edge crept, you could fix the minute the gloves touched the door, the minute the draft entered, the minute the knife tested, the minute the steps changed from stone to wood. The cruelty of the small science is its neutrality, which leaves the value of writing. At the foot of the candle girl, the 4 words weren't a jeer anymore. They were instructions. Here, history isn't found, it is printed. After light has told its part, type will close it. I know that every time I put my pen to the notebook, I yoke my neck to the tail, leave it blank, and light has no bed, and by morning someone else will write it for me. That is the helplessness of trying to save. You must witness, and witnessing is an act. So that day, instead of a name, I wrote the route. No one was singled out. Only props were named. Wick, key, drip, knife, coin, draft, Hour, left hand. Rum cask, last step. Pane, letter A, letter S. Truth frame, compass, anchor, salt halo, nail nick, thumb seal, tin saucer, lime dust, ribbon, cuff seam, shoe the wrong size. One line each. A place each. Together they stage a play in which the candle girl stands in the center. The last pass was to change the lens, slide the Mars rooms out, and lay the 3 other points, Fleet Street, the Watch House, Williamson's, then draw only those lights that can exist on a winter night. Fleet to Watch House, 2 lamps. Watch House to Williamson's, 1 low lamp. From Williamson's back to the Mars, no lamp, only window light thrown back. A gloved man will choose the route with the fewest turns. Where there's headwind, he'll lower the flame. Mapped, the city shows 2 obvious waiting shelves, a niche near the 3rd step, and the Mars back sill. Both have wax. Both are credited to the candle girl by prejudice, but she only passed. Her light carried the hour so another could arrive in time. Night shut, and the press gave one more slip. No headline. Only in italic like a needle. Hour doesn't stand. Hour flows. On the sill, a shape stopped long enough for the candle in its hand not to flicker. Inside, the drop on the set candle fell slower than in the afternoon. The wet coin grew colder against my ribs. The knot lay still like a half-spoken vow. The A waited for the left hand to call it. When everything had taken its place, the candle girl, though asleep behind the curtain, still stood in the middle of the house in the figurative sense. Her light had been spread in the afternoon. Her hour had been set in the frame. The men would finish the parts of stone and iron. The city would finish the parts of paper and edge. I would finish the part of witness. The press would finish the part of end. None of the 4 thinks himself the killer. Each is a finger on the same hand. In the morning the story will change key. But between night and morning there's a color where even the lightest step sounds like water, where a white sheet looks like a cellar mouth, where the knife hasn't fallen but the smell has come. In that color she needn't speak. The light has finished. The wick will burn down exactly 1 night's length. The salt halo on the bench will close another half ring. The headline will be dark enough to move on. From here, the way down is no longer a question. It is the consequence of how the light has been laid. I, hand on the broken A, pocket heavy with the wet coin, coat warm with spermaceti, look straight at the stairs not yet taken. And I understand. Don't look up is for those who want to live. Those who want to know will raise their eyes, not to find the knife, but to see the hour fall. The room accepted that with the faintest stroke of the screw. No spoken close. No chapter ends. Only those 4 objects shifted by an inch you couldn't see. The coin slid between knot and A. The blind candle turned its anchor toward the quay. The paper rolled its printed by you inward. Light, as always, remembers faster than we do. And the candle girl, though unseen, left the hour exactly where it has to lie. Tomorrow the men will carry other lamps into the cellar. They'll be confident, paper in pocket, depositions queued, the proofing nail sealed up. They'll tell each other that the 19th is only another 7th. But light never pulls the same impression. The second print takes deeper. The isodrops will overlay. The knife won't test on glass. The hour won't need her to set it. It will already be under the stairs, where the rum breathes. When I fold the book, I change one habit. Instead of starting at the top margin, I write from the bottom up, leaving the page's head free for the letters to pour like wax. In this case, truth runs straight. It doesn't climb. All I can do is cut the channel so it goes the right way. The last wick tips. The flame leans into the draft I've already measured. The room dims just enough to lose faces and keep the road. Enough for another day's work of hour. Enough for the candle girl to stand in the center again without stepping out. Enough for me to go down, not alone, because the light has gone before. The night watchman. The seal lay flat on the edge of the table like an eye newly lifted from its socket. The copper body honey dark where other hands had often touched it, the silver rim worn smooth where work had slid across. The letters were so fine my fingertips had to learn how to read them. A tight little loop for the P, a tail on the Y that ran longer than it should, and the breath between BY and U narrower than any print I'd seen, as if the engraver had saved a sliver of space for a secret mark yet to be pressed in after. Set down on a bed of dried salt, the seal looked like the city's earring, prim and full of secrets. It wouldn't sit idle. Under a spermaceti flame, I warmed a spoon of scrap wax. pinching up a few glass-clear grains from old drips cut off the table's edge, and stirred until the wax went from silence to a murmur. I wiped the salt, set a piece of rag paper, lowered the wick so the light wouldn't hiss. I pressed the seal, only the weight of one discreet finger, and lifted. The blank wax found a voice my eyes could hear. Shallow lines, along the letter edges, burrs fine as saw teeth. The bite of a resharpened burin, not a brand new tool. I set the impression beside the blind emboss on the cellar plank. Memory clicked on 2 points. The Y's tail exactly a thumbnail too long, and the R's leg bending off true. The kind of kink you get from a hand that cuts leather and book edges more than metal. The mark down there in the rum would bore the same 2 flaws, only swollen where the soaked grain had made the letters bloom. This seal wasn't a joke. It was in service. The room took on a layer of clean metal scent. What was left of the night thinned quickly. The window light was the gray of overwatered ink, and the city sagged halfway between impressions. Margaret stood behind me like a timed silence, let her fingers rest one soft beat on the press frame, then left, the kind of gesture a machine remembers without waking. The watchman arrived the way habit arrives, not boots. 3 knocks on the post, the third always smaller, like the period at the end of an oath. Owen came in like one shadow entering another. No talk. The things on the table told him what he needed. The seal, a halved S slanting left, a left-handed bowline. The space where the wet coin used to go. I'd left that coin at the chalk line in the cellar. The clean square of nothing between the 4, the navel of the story. He looked long at the seal, the lamp hand steady, the other hand curved by a man who'd cradled a staff. His coat still held an old rein and the dry of wood that had given up its salt. When he leaned his shoulder to the room, a new weight settled. Not the pressure that forces confessions, not the pressure that soothes. Weight that tells the objects there's someone ready to carry the blame so they can sleep. You could tell a man like him by the things he counts in a night. He counts the city's 3 locks, street head, mid-wharf, and the brick arch, so he knows the town still has a shape. He counts the pairs of eyes still open after closing, to know who needs their day reviewed. He counts the lamps that have burned past half-wick, so he can plot where something happened. He counts stair treads with skin of wax, to lay the drop map over the draft map. He counts hands still free while other hands are busy, to find the hand that's been reassigned to a knife. The line my press had just breathed, lock 3 for sleep. And count the hand that is free. Wasn't a sentence. It was a manual. 3 locks for sleep. He takes to mean 3 points to bolt with his own hand before dawn. The top latch of the shop door, the side gate toward the river, the little cut-through that opens on the neighbor's walk. The free hand, to a watchman, is the hand not busy with lamp, staff, or bell rope. Whoever still has a hand to spare in a job that should take 2 has redistributed the work to the furniture around him, which means a plan and someone else. We went out while the light was still undecided about becoming light. The riverside boards were as narrow as a modest clause. The stone kept the kind of cold that belongs to water. Yesterday's salt on the posts had washed into chalk. The watchman walked grooves he'd worn into the street. Where he dropped the lamp lower, he stripped glare off glass. Where he raised it, sign letters turned to mirrored letters. Enough to read blade tests on window panes without looking up. He didn't have to speak. Each move was a note I wrote with my eyes. First surprise at the church corner. A flat, nail-thin smear of old wax. Exactly at a child's reach on the pillar. Not tallow. A church cut of spermaceti. Clean stuff, chalk cut cheap and pale blue like the parish buys for reading hours. On that skin of wax, almost invisible, half an O from you pressed in. Only half. As if someone had tested the seal here in haste. There's no earthly reason to stamp printed by you on a church pillar unless you want to prove to a certain reader that the sentence can live anywhere, even where God stands. Second, under the watch house window, the sill had a fresh shine where a body had leaned too long. I set a new wax take from the seal onto that sheen and lifted it again. The oil made a fixed little saw bite on the bee, slid down and up once more, and the small dark triangle fit the wise wayward tale. Someone inside this house knows this seal. Guessing the name is easy. Measuring whether that hand set it or was made to set it is the hard part. Third, on the cellar stairs at Williamson's, a blind stamp on a tread, not last night's. Rum had pulled color to the edges where the R wept a darker line. Whoever chose the height, new eyes looking for spilled drink would pass right over it. Read you without knowing they'd read it. You, there is no longer a theory. It is attached to the last foot that crossed that plank. The lesson ran through Fleet Street. Reed had been pulled off the wheel a few hours and already stood in his doorway, eyes angled toward copy like fish strung for air. Habit, let me see the pace that stitches small powers together, where the public notice sits, where the money sleeps, where the money sleeps, where the lamp changes breath. The frame with truth hung upside down, still pinned at a corner by the brass compass. In daylight, the arc lit like a bone ridge over a brow. Other mornings it read like a joke. Today it said, type is aligned. By noon, the social machinery rolled out the program that lets a city sleep. A short notice on the cellar commotion went to the side column, 12 tight lines, opening bland, closing with inquiries continue. Under it, an advert for a chandler selling clean candles for reading hours, set to fit. Whoever laid the page had stitched the town like a tidy surgeon, no seepage showing. Paper skated the street the way wind strokes a river's skin. That quiet surface pulls every eye off the point that matters. I'm not saying who is wrong. I'm saying the degree of seeing was set in advance by the degree of clean. Afternoon compressed like damp wood, ready to push back. 3 warrants went in like 3 wedges. Reed, Margaret, Owen. It was all there, plain as a scratch on glass. Each wedge shuts a draft, stops a mouth. In truth, Owen won't sit under that wedge. He goes round it the way night teaches nightmen to go round things. When one door shuts, the walls begin talking. We walked his circuit again, this time not to patrol, but to read. A watchman's habit turned into a surveyor's line. At each point we set a small trial. A hair fixed with a slick of church-grade sperma along the side door bolt. A film of lamp soot smeared on the face of a lock. A single dry salt crystal stood alone on the table's lip. A thread of twin wicks set like a spider strand on the cellar stair. Whoever touched would break. Whatever broke would speak. In this city, traps don't catch. They record. By half-afternoon, the first replies came back. The soot wiped off half the lock face in the pull of a left hand. No daylight neighbor opens that door from outside. Only a man who walks like he owns it. The thread shivered, not once, but in a low pattern. 1, 3, 5. From the river draft, someone went down by the unlit way in the gray hour between day and night. The little salt bead rolled half a circle inward, like a late clock taking its second beat. Together, they drew a chart only a watchman reads. Night writes fair parts for all players. Staff men go first. Lamp men choose the angle. Knife men wait. Print men arrive late and still catch the sentence. Don't be there when the light changes, the newsman's catechism said, right on time. So you know danger had shifted hardware to software, steel to paper. The seller taught the same last night. You can pull a lamp out of a man's eye with a cheap hand mirror. Tonight the noise to pull out of a mouth is a name. The press had warned me. There will be a scream without a name. Don't write it. All day I practiced this one thing, reading men by their free hand. Reed keeps one finger on his chin when his other hand holds the dead pipe. Born to watch thickness of ink, not thickness of people. Hawthorne's left sits on the cane, right on the coat hem. Born to keep language from running past the curb. Fenwick keeps both hands hidden in sleeves cut deep enough to square the cuff. Whenever he needs one, it slips like a backward knife. Ned does everything with black hands. Grip, drop, set, pull. Unless he must vanish, then there are no hands. The unknown sailor ties with the left, leaves the right for work no one will name. Owen doesn't advise. He does, and I copy. He lowers the lamp below custom, flattening the night into a plane instead of opening it like a mouth. His staff isn't for striking. It takes the depth of shadow. House by house, he taps thresholds like a jeweler tapping a case, and listens for tiny differences that separate sleep from watchfulness. At Mars, he stood long enough for the salt on the table's lip to pull wet out of the air through the crack. In that stillness, the seal I'd set made a faint circle on my own vision. Stare too long at any one place, and the eye stamps printed by you on itself. The city presses words into the eye before it presses them into paper. One small thing at the chandler's ledger was worth ink. Under the old line Margaret, missing an A. A new customer logged, name spelled clean with both As, but the last S leaned as if a left hand had written it. The seller didn't notice. She marked a pale blue box, 1 coin, wet. The blue box was the shard that made the picture come clear. The payer likes the story wet, not for the money, but for the road the money takes. Put the coin in a man of letters' palm, and he'll bring the draft to the right crack of door. After midnight the trials all spoke at once. The hair at the side door latch was cut, not in the sweet direction of a normal open, sliced the other way. A dust film printed itself on someone's cuff at the corner. The salt on the table was gone by half. The twin wick had been trimmed shorter, once, so the light would sit low. All of it saying one sentence in the dialect of things. The scene is repeating, only in a heavier hand. The watchman hears weather like that on a roof. Clarity built itself. Lock 3 for sleep wasn't just an order for Mars. It was for the press and the watch house. First lock the news. Hold read just enough that readers have one source. Second, lock the hour. Keep the candle girl inside so every candle out there is an orphan. Third, lock the eyes. Drag the watchman out of his part and hang a coat of guilt big enough he won't dare look. With 3 locks in place, a city sleeps on a story already set. Only the man with one free hand walks the lanes between wharf and print. The seal moved 1 square forward too. How does a machine's joke become a coin's power? The answer was in the metal. The face wasn't solid copper, a copper core with a silver cap. The build poured offices and guild stampers like firm, easy to cut, silver prints clean. Around the rim ran a hairline groove, a screw ring. The face unscrews. Printed by you is swappable. Whoever holds that thing holds the right to change the sentence. That is the power. Dawn came up while we were still 2 shadows walking. Margaret went back in as quiet as a line that needs no reading. The wick sat at the right height. The cool white on her collar had faded to a thought. Outside the watch house door a circle of dry salt appeared. Someone had set a wet coin and lifted it. And in that old pale ring the tip of a Y touched down. Not deep, just enough for a trained eye. The man who keeps the order doesn't walk once and stop. He walks on what he's already printed. The hours after didn't hold climax. They held trade. Owen stacked the little trials and copied them into the memory of a man who knows street law better than paper law. He taught one last wordless trick. When you can't look at a face, look at the give of things. Salt gives to wet, wax to heat, cloth to wind, wood to the part most handled. The passerby leaves give, not names. Near noon, print answered back. A new sheet ran down the street. Tight title, tight column, lines falling exactly where they should, and one thing slapped a printer's eye. The Y in by authority had the same long tail as printed by you. An engraver's habits won't hide when he turns out different faces in the same shop. The tool leaves its hand. That doesn't name a man, it names a workshop. And the shop made me think of the stamp makers who outfit port and guild, who sell faces that read by authority, by order, received, and, if the price is right, a private printed by you. A little grid grew in my notebook. Left column, props, seal, candle, coin, glove, mirror, staff, lamp, knife, paper. Middle, the people they hang from. The candle girl, the sailor, the deputy, the chandler, Reed, Hawthorne, Father Gray, Owen. Right column, the city's points. Watch House, Fleet Street, St. George's, Pear Tree, Williamson's, the highway. Each row tied by a kind of road. Wind road, scent road, light road, word road. At the crossing of Watchman and Lamp, the road is height of flame. Sailor and glove, a fine seam. Deputy and seal, the Y-tail. Reed and paper, the broken serif. Candle girl and hour, the drip beat. The grid doesn't say who. It lays out a play with many hands. By late day, another answer came, the look on Father Gray's face. When I pressed the seal to a church scrap, the silver didn't shine as it had at my table. It held his fingertip longer than it had to. He said nothing. He pressed like a man giving the host. In that new little hollow, a rim of crystals showed. Salt, fine as frost. I knew where it came from. The church pulls street wind the same way the cellar pulls rum breath. His part is not a part. It's terrain. The one thing he can do there is bless a silence. The only civic medicine this town believes in. That's why the candle girl's silence fetches a better price than other people's silence. At the color turn of day, the watchman taught the last technique. Show a free hand by what it fails to touch. On the door frame, he tied a thin hemp at the crook height. Left-handers and right stand 2 fingers different. On the table, he set a cup of water with a paper skin. Right hands bump water more, being busy with the lamp. Left hands go straight to the key without touching. On the floor, he sifted the thinnest ring of charcoal, just enough to kiss the toe of someone too quick. Nothing would stop a man. Everything would write him down. A watchman owns no jail. He owns a ledger made by things. Night curled into the street. The wharf licked salt on the sill. The hemp rang at a left-hand height. The cup trembled once and stilled. The charcoal drew a toe angled inward. The twin wick had been paired by half a line. The seal on the table sat a degree off. Someone had tried it and put it back crooked. The signs talked in a language that didn't need lips. You'd think it enough to bring a man into the room. But the press held my wrist. Don't write the scream without a name. A man who owns a noise but no name becomes a name when paper needs to sleep. I sat and let the objects talk to each other until the lids fell like a tired lid on a box. In the short sleep, the seal hopped the table's edge and tattooed you on every surface: glass, wood, cloth, salt, hair, until there was no border between me and them. I woke with one ring of wick left, the press breathing like a beast that has decided to spare someone. Margaret lay behind the curtain, the sleep of a timekeeper not deep. At the sound of posts talking to each other, she turned, cloth whispering a thin letter. Owen sat on the stoop, back to the column, lamp in his lap, the free hand resting on the staff. For bodies and four things were enough to hold the city's frame one more night. Just before light, a name shard showed itself not as a word, but as a fault. My coat pocket, the pocket that always had the broken when my hand remembered it, lay flat and innocent. The A hadn't come home. Absence bit harder than any present proof. In a shop, drop type is an accident. In this life, a missing letter is intent. Whoever holds that A holds the key to likeness. All the William S. in town will carry the same nicked chin. When the hour comes to point at someone, you print one like that and lay it on a table. On my table, the printed by you face and that broken A weren't touching, but they're a pair, a face for stamping objects, a bone for stamping words. Day stepped in like a subtitle writer for the night. The watchman rose without spending a hinge and walked his road once more before he gave it to the next man. The same 3 lines under his breath. Lock 3 places, count the free hand. Don't give a name to a scream. He didn't need to say who was the noise and who the name. Hats and pins on the main road would do that. His business is to let the things finish their sentences without dying for it. I stayed with the press and the seal. The light came up like dried paste. Last night's water left a salt ring in the cup's mouth. There was one debt to pay before the next dark. Answer my own question, the one that had sat on the table like a sunk anchor. If printed by you is a power, who is you? In a list, you falls into layers. First, the hand that holds the face. One person with a screw-on plate, fond of long white tails. Second, the shop that grants the right to have faces and sees the freight in and out. Third, the institutions that turn sentences into seals. Watch house, port, guild, church. Fourth, the machine. The order that lives in me and drags my wrist to the bed of the press night after night. Fifth, worst, the reader. Anyone willing to accept the printed story as his own. Of the 5, the watchman stands at the margin. He has no face, no shop, no institution, isn't a machine. All he has is the chance to refuse to be you in that last sense. Refusal has a ceiling. Once the seams are stitched tight, his silence translates to collusion. That's the cruelty in the job title in this town. Each night he teaches others to count which hand is free, and each night he learns to keep his own hand out of type. I put that down in the book in sentences that don't bother with verbs. Not style, breath. I'd spent mine in the cellar. From now to any cellar is a walk toward a letter newly freed from a knife. Verdict. One thing left for this bright stretch. Walk Owen's route one last time. Carry the seal like a surplus eye in my pocket and press one small returning mark on the city's tired heart. Not to keep it, to give it back. A smell came in that doesn't belong to the kitchen. Iron. Not the old red kind. The new kind, just off a file. It talks different. High, clean, proud. At the lane's mouth, a small box under cloth sat on a tilt. The lid cracked a line, a half-compass cut on the rim pointing east. No messenger, only a direction. Inside, a thin zinc plate with letters cut wrong way. One pass would throw a black, hard title. Lock 3, count 1. Under the lining, a breath of clean spermaceti rose now and then, a note too high to sing. The cinder left no name. The smell had already addressed it. I shut the lid. I didn't open the box toward the motive. I left it lying like a stone in a mouth of river. I set the printed by you seal on top. Two metals recognizing each other by the road of cold. Their silence had edges. Inside, the press heard the kiss of metal and took one shallow stroke, like a sleeper turning. Day's work done, night's back in session. The watchman walked on. I stood at the little window, back to wood, let the ghost of you slide off my retina like a pane lifting, so I could see the road under it. The road sloped back to the wharf, crossed the church, hooked the watch house, grazed Fleet Street, bright where light likes, dead where salt sleeps. At each corner, one hand would still be free unless someone made it pay. At each second, a noise might break that no one could attach a name to. I got ready not to write it, the way the press told me. The 19th hadn't arrived. It stood in one place and dragged us toward it like an anchor set below the current. Between now and then the watchman's chapter doesn't need lines. It needs a sure step, a low lamp, a light staff, 3 true bolts, a pocket with no one else's letter in it, and a heart that refuses one more time to be you. The candle girl stays the silent minute hand. Her hour is fixed. Another man's knife will wait on the right stair. My job is height of light, so the mirror falls into shadow, not into eyes. The press took the day's last breath and gave me a gray sheet, neither word nor blank, a kind of ground only printers recognize. The paper had drunk damp and was ready to eat ink. At the lower edge, very small, a half-Y flashed. Not the omen of a sentence, the omen of a right. And in this city, rights rarely land in the right hands. Choosing the free hand, morning declared itself innocent the way it always had, by hurting a little shadow off the floorboards, dragging a pale stripe of light across the press bed, letting the salt ring shrink like a wedding band just slipped from a dead hand. The worn anchor seal with its cold legend printed by you still stood guard, a wide, unblinking eye on wood, its silver face scratched with filaments subtle enough that fingertips read them better than sight. Metal brushed the press frame and made a sound too small for ears, a bone sound, reminding me that power rarely needs to speak aloud. Margaret stepped from behind the curtain with the practiced economy of someone who has learned silence as a trade. Hair bound neat, the cool wax line at her collar faded like a half-spent reminder, the rag moving in orbits that have hidden stories before. Her hand paused where the old blade test scored the grain, not by intent, but because rooms remember. Things know who has done what, and they guide the right hand to the right place so the fiction of ordinary can continue. In this city, no one wastes a good morning. Being alive finishes the ritual. The wet coin came off the ledger page. The mouth of a hot cup held it, and the salt halo melted slow, smiling at its own imposture. The seal's gaze crowded in between me and the coin and set the day's axis. Long ago the you imprinted by you ceased being a pronoun. It became a conscription, an initiation, a toll, a collar of responsibility. It asks in a way no single sentence can answer. Today, who carries you? Hawthorne with his 3 locks for sleep, Reed with the broken A, confession blanks, and the pre-meal bark of headlines. Fenwick's deputy with his compass and square and disciplined cuffs, the nameless sailor smelling of old salt with a left-leaning S, or the hand turning this press. The question dropped like an anchor into mist, bottom unfathomed. The coin went back to pocket, the book shut, the press table set out toward the 4 quarters, a bowline tied backwards, a glove scrap with a silvered edge torn, a half-page bit with an S half bitten on, a blind nubble of candle scored with a faint EIC anchor, the anchor seal itself on watch. Morning posed an ethical sum with no promise of solution. Print or do not. If print, print what? And if printed by you, then you has already hooked skin. At noon, the pear tree rolled in its joints like a ship that hasn't slipped the mooring, old timber whispering, pitch giving the room its grammar. Owen sat by the post, eyes damp the way wind sleep leaves them. All night men share the same auxiliary nervous system. Ears fall into the gaps between sounds. Eyes rake window edges more than faces. I slid him the glove scrap, set the wrong-handed bowline alongside. The objects talked to each other before they talked to me. Evening, by the custom of the trade, would begin with an unspoken caution. Not the cellar tonight. Avoid being alone because of the door next over. The chandler's door opened with wax scrape. Air parted into 3 tastes. Heavy tallow, sweet beeswax, clean spermaceti. She handed over Twinwick without asking what we meant to read. This shop sells light for reading secrets, not for finding the road. In the ledger, the line Margaret on the 6th still lacked an A, missing on purpose, the city's way of tagging its own. Beneath, a pale ink, wet note, the seller remembers by color, not name. The only useful memory in a town built to pass guilt hand to hand. Father Gray waited in St. George's with hands equal to blessing and keeping. He set down a candle already bearing the dent of his thumb. We spoke of printing a sheet, not for sale, in the grammar of men afraid their words might bite back. The ethical question stood clear in his eyes. When you turn justice into a plebiscite, does the printer print what he wants or what God wants? God has no counter here. Only age and sin enough to print one's portion of guilt and pray a provisional justice carries the city over one night. A palm on my brow gave the paper its rest to lean on. Fleet Street's throat was clogged this afternoon. News queued, pins itching. Reed was yanked back and forth between doorways like a fish weighed twice. His mouth held a tradesman's curve of confidence, but his left hand was clean of wax. The upside-down truth frame stayed pinned by the compass, angle neat as a surgical stitch. No need to go in. What I needed from him, the broken A, sat in another hand. The watch house aired a plain philosophy: 3 locks for sleep. 1 sheet, holding Reed for disturbing information. 1 holding Margaret for witness safety. 1 suspending Owen for drink. The house's naming cares nothing for anyone's pulse. It cares for the mass nap. Day closure done clean and dry. Dry voice, dry hands, dry paper. If you hear means authority, the letter shape is set. The question is who dares bend it. Back to Mars, back to the body of the machine. The sky poured cheap gray ink, the kind mixed for speed. Margaret was present in professional quiet. The press lay diagonally like a beast that knows the hour. The anchor seal kept its counsel in the corner. The room understood we were to print a sheet not to be sold. No names, no price, no adverts. The face of the sheet declared itself. A title set big, deliberately echoing yesterday's to hold the crowd in a familiar syntax. Lock 3 for sleep. Choose the free hand. Beneath it, no defendant, no suspect in the court's cadence, no father-mother name. Only shadows, signs, habits, beats, the things London trusts more than baptismal entries. Shadow 1. Hat. A smell not from here. Wind changes at his heels. Backward bowlin'. The S spliced onto galley just so by a left hand. Spermaceti drips round as a blind fisheye on the paper edge. Shadow 2. Cuff seems squared like a compass ant square. Clean clerk script. S slants left. Short wick for reading. More wax on him than ink. Stands nested inside administrative shade. Shadow 3. Prints ahead of truth. Keeps the broken A. Sets Willians/Willians as a countersign. Leaves I, standing on the galley for another hand to finish. Arrives when a first line is needed. Shadow 4. Dry hand prefers paper to ink. Shifts the watch. Gathers wet coins. Throws 3 locks so the town can sleep. Keys fit many holes. Dislikes people's voices more than he dislikes affidavits. I meant to add a 5th for the loose hue. The reader, anyone willing to adopt a printed tale as his own. But paper takes ink better than ethics. That had to be left for the quiet line. I set small pica, feeding sorts into the composing stick. The tick of lead-on would synced with breath. The wrist did the trade's catechism. Don't shake, don't stall, don't editorialize. Margaret minded the wick, kept the draft, weighted the room's noise, trimmed the flame low so the lamp would hate mirrors. The candlewoman in her worked with the pressman in me. The first pulls were hoarse, the later ones found lungs. The first slid, ink taking to fiber like a fish mouthing the bottom. Then the second, the 10th, the 100th, the 450th. At 5:01 the press balked and spat a blank. Not a fault, a private note. Tonight's sheet also carries the U of the hand that turned it. The bundle got a short knot. The sling rode my rib. Owen went ahead like a shadow checking shadows. Margaret stayed locked in like the keeper of the clock. The street's reflex took the message. Hands tucked, eyes slanted, mouth chill. Each crew read in its own accent. Wharf boys sniffed the smell. Coopers read the wood. Oyster sellers heard the knife. The chandler heard the drip. The faithful heard grace. Clerks heard the right column. The suspect sheet went round like weather. Into the cooperage, out along the canal, past the lamppost, halted at the watchhouse stoop, folded at the chandler's corner, hushed before the church, turned at the highway's end. Side effects arrived early, questions molted. Half the street cheered because choosing felt like power, half bristled because choosing felt like conscription. The middle held like a wick. Each person defined free hand by trade. To a netman, it's the nodding hand that keeps the rest from falling. To a locksmith, it's the hand that opens while all others hold. To a watchman, it's the hand with no lamp and no staff, free to count. One meaning rose. The keeper of the free hand is the one the night's structure prefers. The watchhouse was tight as a fish belly on a bone. Hawthorne received the sheet like a man used to stamped paper. Eyes reading, mouth shut, hands folding toward a drawer. His surface didn't move. The text aligned with his 3 locks like a sum worked out earlier. A few deputies viewed it through the wood frame. Pen nibs twitched, itching to reach in and fix a comma. Reed slid by with the profession smile. Strong layout. A title that sells. A verdict of craft. Down at the wharf, Ned slapped the page on a bollard. An old hand sniffed the ink the way he'd sniff a float. A fishwife hissed. Right angle. Right hour. Compass and squares line. Children smudged bold half-SS onto each other's lips. Black laughter circled the bridge. When the choosing sheets had gone, the blank sheet stayed, as blanks make nights keener. It lay quiet among the 4 things. Knot, glove, blind candle. The press breathed even, its wooden tongue shut and open like the jaw of a gentle beast that only bites when asked plain. Night fell like a shroud. Hawthorne's 3 locks worked to pitch. News locked by Reed. Hour locked by Margaret. Eyes locked by Owen. The city changed to sleep voice. Knives wiped. Wicks trimmed. Papers folded. Rum and salt rose into the nose. Everyone thought their part done. Only the wind distrust calendars. Inside, the 4 things kept their talk without an interpreter. The knot spoke orbit. The glove spoke contact. The half-S spoke habit. The blind candle spoke hour. The seal in the corner spoke right. The blank in the middle made emptiness. Each pushed a small force, not enough to print. Together, they formed a counter to the tidy fit of locks. St. George's coughed once. The highway winked at the far end. The back latch breathed a smell of iron cleaner than blood. The smell a knife wears just out of water. No need to look up. The cellar lesson was still warm. The thing to watch was paper. The lower edge of the blank sweated a thin line of type. Cogs overbit, or a fingertip brushed where it shouldn't. The press's sentence rose hair-thin. 3 locks are shut. But the side door never was. It didn't need to be read aloud. The room drank it like wood drinks water. The air lost half its chest hum. The wick dropped a notch. The candle sulked less. Margaret slept shallow, the keeper sleep. Her back heard the posts murmur like housebone telling itself old stories. Her breath counted the last measures of night. Owen sat on the stoop, column straight, lamp on his knee, the free hand resting the staff. He stood out by the amount of noise he refused. Between them the press was a mild secret keeper. One short stroke, then still. Out in the street the city pulled its coverlet to the throat. The administrative shadow passed like clockwork. The wharf shadow salted the stones. The church shadow pressed a finger to lips. The printing house shadow hung letters to dry. The afternoon's sheet turned mirror thin. Those who wanted to be chosen moved faster. Those afraid of being chosen went the long way. Those who wanted out of choosing tried to rename you. At the Williamson stair, the door next over, the wind's door, was never locked. 3 locks for sleep could not stop wind. Day after came in by the path of someone wanting to carry on without changing tone. Part of the street had already chosen in mind. Part was weighing. The middle wanted a delay. Printed by you shown on walls like a kind of coercion. Each person made a private concord. Someone noticed the Y tail on the seal matched the Y in by authority on the appendix. The engraver cut both with the same point. Faces are swappable. For the first time since the cellar, you look like a workshop more than a person. The Chandler's spermaceti marked authority's page just like the smear on Reed's galley. The deputy's cuff seam matched the square edge cut on the seal plate. Fleet Street's page placement clicked deliberately through the same slots as the watchhouse locks. A pack was walking in each other's shadows, wearing faces that didn't want to fit. Owen used the morning as an audit. He walked last night's tell points again. The hair at the side latch severed left. The water cup trembled one circle and steadied. Charcoal closed a half ring like the flat toe of a left-foot man. The wick was trimmed by another hair. The seal sat a degree off, by someone else's fingers. The signs didn't name. They agreed on a type. The watchman filed the result where he keeps the city's chart of things. That same morning, a mistake stuck out. The pocket that kept the broken allay innocent and flat. Absence weighed more than any presence. The missing letter dragged a whole train behind it. Every willingness in the city will carry the same chipped chin. The hour anyone needs a culprit, you lay a page with a broken A on the table. The press learns people's trick. If you want to pin guilt, mass-produce a habit easy to spot and easy to repeat. The printed by you seal beside it doesn't ask for letters. It asks for surfaces: wood, wax, salt, cloth, stone. With pieces back in their stations, choose the free hand stepped off the page into a way to read time. Here, the free hand is the hand not busy when the blade comes down. It might be the hand of the wind, of the page, of the seal, of the man with keys, of the man who takes the wet coin, of the hand that trims the wick, of the one who changes the watch. To choose someone is to choose a structure. What needs printing isn't a name, it's the night's diagram. The second evening's not for sale sheet lived another circuit of the streets. Some used it as a mask, some as a mirror, a few as a charm. The watchman disliked all three. He trusts only the give of objects under a fingertip. They don't define the toucher, they measure him. I got back to Mars as the lamps thought of rising. The seal stood to one side, waiting. The wick lay ready. The blank sheets were stacked away. The press kept the kind of quiet a beast keeps when its owner is about to risk something. Neither blocking nor urging, just holding breath. Margaret stitched a few runs of black ribbon with a speed like cutting a vein. Her needle was steady as a minute hand. The thought of a referendum on justice sharpened. The sheet had opened a door knives like. The chooser of the free hand chooses a blade for it. The insight was right and unfair at once. There was no other way to pull the story out of authority's mouth. The only stopgap was to force words through a seal instead of a throat. Before midnight, the city set the three locks again. No one needed to read the lesson: news, hour, eyes. We took our stations, me with the press, Margaret with the time, Owen with the light. The scream without a name the press had foretold lived somewhere between the neck of the wind and the ear rim of the street. It would come through the side door, where big crimes prefer to walk. On the table's edge, a single salt crystal stood upright, like a tiny person begging to be seen. It recalled the coin ring that smiled off the cup yesterday. There is a grammar between circles and lines. The salt circle on wood, the seal's ring on wax, the round of procedure, the wet coin's halo on stone, the twin wick's loop. All of them say, the point doesn't vanish, it returns in another shape. When locks hold, another door opens. The chapter's ending has to open that way, because verdict doesn't belong to printers. So when I set the last line for the day, 3 locks are shut. But the side door never was dot. I lowered the candle a notch, leaned my back to wood, opened my hand until the blank in the middle felt like it was waiting on new words. Outside, people began to have opinions about our sheet. Half proud they had chosen right, half sour at being led. Both halves were right, because every printed by you is an adjective glued to the reader's will. It's strong because many agree to stamp it. The completeness of this chapter doesn't lie in answering who is you. It lies in delaying the conversion of the scream about to arrive into a name. By a single beat, and the knife falls into wood instead of a throat. With minor record traps and a habit of lowering the light, the watchman bought that half beat. With a sheet that isn't for sale and a blank kept at the center, the pressman pinned his own you to the page, not to dodge, but to keep someone else from pasting you to his brow. When my lids touched, the press struck one dot without ink. That didn't appear on paper. It appeared in the pulled wire of nerves. The side door never was locked. The 19th stands in one place, tugging at collars, at eyes, at habits, pulling lines between the S of Salus and Sailor, between the broken A of news and the broken A of guilt, between by authority and printed by you. The knight's free hand, whoever he is, waits for the hour when it isn't busy. What remains is wind's work. All we have to set against the city are the height of the light, the weight of quiet, the give of things, the ballast of a heart. That's everything a turner of presses, a keeper of hours, and a watchman can lay side by side to face a city believing and distrusting itself at once. Margin note, not for walls. For the book, if tomorrow the seal returns and demands a different face, by order, say, then you will trade bodies again. Then the blank must change places with the blind candle. Light will no longer be enough to read, only enough to count. When people count, they give fewer names. With fewer names, the knife hesitates a half-beat. In a city with only a low fever for truth, a half-beat is worth a life. For now, the chapter doesn't need a coda. It needs to hold the gaze strung between seal and blank, between the free hand and the busy hand, between choosing as a tool and choosing as a right. Because even if the next moment demands a scream, and it will come without a name, not writing it down remains the hardest part of the trade. We kept our hands off type for one more night. The city, meanwhile, slept under 3 locks and opened to a door no one will claim. And for that reason, the line stamped on the lower edge of every object keeps shining without a lamp. Printed by you. The side door. Morning tilted over the city like a dull knife across an orange peel. It didn't cut, but the scent still broke free. On the edge of the press table, the salt ring had tightened one more turn, thin as a morning trim on a wedding dress. The anchor seal, cold and steady with its words printed by you, leaned against the frame, its eye open. The room kept its studied anatomy, the linseed oil resting beneath the ash of night, the paper dry on the surface but damp at the core, the wood swollen a breath wider where hands always rested. No one greeted anyone. The house confirmed its survivors by rhythm of breath alone, alive. Margaret stepped out, hair tied clean, the cool wax line on her neck faded like a vow that had rained through the night. She wiped the table with the reflex of someone trained to erase stories. The rag paused where the test blade once struck, then moved on. A nod replaced all formal speech. Inside that nod was everything required. Asked, answered, not yet broken. On the table, the 4 familiar objects held their posts. A bowline not tied backwards, a torn glove with a silvered edge, a bitten half of the letter S, and a blind candle stub marked with the anchor crest. In the middle lay a blank sheet, empty as the eye of someone about to receive bad news. The brass seal beside it felt colder than water. The entire day fit inside that diamond of space. News moved through the city the way light things do. Fast, clinging to faces before falling away. The 3 locks were still in place. Papers signed. The suspect list nailed to posts. The sheet locked 3 for sleep. Choose the free hand. Printed the night before. Hung damp in corners of markets, bridges, and fish stalls. The city chose by scent, by tilt, by slant of letter, not by baptismal name. And as it chose, it slept by habit, not by command. No need for trumpets, no need for drums. Just the tools reset. A double wick, 2 sticks of spermaceti for reading, a leather ledger, the anchor seal, and the wooden machine that breathed. The goal was not to catch or to calm, but to trace the route of the wind, the only thing in London that refused orders. The Pear Tree Tavern kept the silence of noon, as if holding a sleeping cat. Owen sat by the post, eyes damp in the way of men who count nights in their heads. The torn glove edge had dried. The reversed bowline still hooked inward, like a sentence refusing its period. A tilt of the head replaced, we met last night in the cellar. A gentle push of evidence back and forth replaced, you bring it, I'll keep it. There are sentences this city no longer wastes words on. The chandler's door opened with wax scrape. The retail ledger lay open to the 6th. The line, Margaret, still missing its A. The green ink, once marked wet, now dry at the edges, still damp at the heart. New twin wicks, 2 clean spermaceti sticks, no one asked what for. The smells arranged themselves. Thick tallow, sweet beeswax, clean spermaceti, 3 corners of prayer. The seller never looked at faces. She listened to scent on the customer's coat. Not from here, or still here. St. George's breathed like an oiled lung. On the altar, Father Gray's thumbprint dented the candle's side. No sermon, only a hand pressed to a brow. The weight of that gesture alone could keep a sheet of paper from falling into blood. Fleet Street flinched at the new broadside. Truth still hung upside down in Reed's office, the compass pinning its corner like a fine needle in the eye of someone unwilling to see. No need to enter. Everything needed from him was already present without him. The broken seraphin now in another's hand. The old trick of shouting news before truth. The habit of printing Willians as tribal code. Between those points, a pattern of wind drew itself in my head. A back door, a reading candle, a vent half open, a drip of wax slanted left, a silver fleck on a glove's edge, a mismatched shoe sound, a knife hanging above. All joined into one brief sentence. The side door. Not the front. Not the back. The door everyone forgets, because it always belongs to the neighbor's house. After dusk, the streets darkened fast. Cheap ink poured too thick. Hawthorne arrived. Dry voice, dry hands. 3 papers. Hold. Protect. Suspend. Already filed away. Stay out of the cellar. A sentence straight as a watchman's staff. The pass in my pocket weighed more than a hat. No argument. Sometimes the only way to disobey is to follow perfectly. Mar's door was bolted from inside. Margaret stayed with the press. Owen sat on the step. The rest, those pasting notices, reading sheets, sweeping corners, were busy in their own fashions. Our work, find the side door. It wasn't adventure. It was measurement. The tools, a double wick, a tin of oil, 1 string for charting flow. Behind the kitchen wall of the adjoining house hid a forgotten vent, sealed with particle board. The board smelled of thin salt and new lime. Turn the zinc screw half around. Air hissed out, tracing a slanted line down the floor like cursive in fog. Light the spermaceti, let the drops fall. 2 for 6. The wind leaned left. Cracked the neighboring latch a quarter turn. The drips changed pace. 1 3 5. The wind's triangle closed. The gap could fit a hand, not a man. On the wood near the gap, a faint glove scratch gleamed, a touch of silver like fish scale. A shallow scrape on the rear lock, mortar patched under dry salt. To the eye, a cheap house with a tired porch. To the wind, a door. When I turned back, the room looked at me like it had seen someone return through a wall. Margaret brushed the press as if asking, still breathing? Without sound. The machine was warm at the heartline. The anchor seal kept watch, its face cold. The 4 objects still held their quarters. On the blank page, nothing yet. The stillness in the room felt false, like a calm before a long cough. The city pulled its blanket up to the neck. 3 locks still held. The side door, no one remembered to bolt. At the watch house, the man on rotation was lazy and good at it. He knew how to sleep without being caught. On Fleet Street, the reading lamp burned the size of a sigh. At Williamson's, the rum sellers rehearsed old explosions. In the church, beeswax sank lower than any other night, yet the smoke still kept the rhythm of prayer. Down at the wharf, ropes rubbed timber in a long somnambulant dream. And in Mars, the double wick burned true, no reflection in the glass, because a knife hung above the pane. Inside, the counting went by trade. 12 breaths, 1 drip, 2 creaks of wood, 1 stair drawing itself tight, 1 strip of cloth dragging across a nail. Back to the press. Eyes on the blank sheet in the middle of the table. The warning the machine had spoken nights ago returned. There will be a cry without a name. Do not write it. The anchor seal looked sideways, teaching the harder rule. Sometimes letters must stand still. Owen on the step didn't nod, didn't speak. The ridge of his jaw said enough. I'm here. The wet in his eyes came from the wind, not the bottle. Margaret behind the curtain didn't sleep. You don't need sight to know. Those who've held candles too long can hear flame in other people's lungs. Her silence was foundation, the kind a good print needs. Still, steady, holding. Between 2 church bells, the timber frame of the house itched itself awake. 1 tremor, like someone trying to say a name but afraid to pronounce it. A thin draft cut through the back gap, carrying the smell of metal cleaner than blood. Don't look up. Look at the page. Along the bottom edge of the paper, a sheen of sweat appeared, paper's own pulse. A gear had bitten too hard, or a fingertip had brushed where it shouldn't. Out of that trace, words grew fine as moss. 3 locks are shut, but the side door never was. Outside, footsteps passed the house like sentences half-translated. Some without periods, some broken midline, some misspelled on purpose for recognition. The wind walked the porch, licking the same corner where the day's triangle of air had been drawn. Inside, the candle didn't flicker, it read. The scream came last. It had no name, nowhere to hang from. No one shouted help, no one murder. Just a sound torn from someone's chest, sliding through slats, changing pitch 3 times on its climb from cellar to porch. It moved through the room like a lost fish brushing the table's edge, leaving no scale behind. It went straight to the blank sheet. The hand rose on reflex, the reflex of a printer, a recorder, a witness. But the warning shut the hand in time. Don't write. In the silence that followed, every object in the house spoke in its own dialect. The reversed Bolin lay belly down like an insect refusing to crawl. The torn silvered glove caught a gleam that wasn't from the lamp. The half-S leaned against the page's edge, tired. The blind candle tilted its head toward the wind's triangle. The anchor seal stood straighter than before. The entire city, in its own way, understood the side door had done its work. No one needed to run there to confirm. Houses sharing walls have their way of talking through timber, no messengers required. From the watch house, papers would be pulled from drawers. From Fleet Street, titles would compose themselves. From Williamson's, the smell of rum would start walking. From St. George's, a single bell would breathe at the right interval. From the wharf, salt would crust the story's edge. From every doorway, people would claim they'd known all along. No one wrong, because printed by you. Running from the house now would only draw a fresh line of ink across the street. Our job, mind the press, guard the light, don't print the cry. A single blank sheet still lay at the center. I looked at it the way you look at uncured timber. Step on it now, and your footprint is permanent. I turned the anchor seal face down so I wouldn't watch. Retied the Bolin, this time the right way round. A small gesture of reversed fortune. Slid that knot into the bundle of black ribbon Margaret had left at the table's corner. Not to protect anyone from the knife. No cord ever could. Only to remind the living that one thread still lies true. Owen stayed on the step, tapping 321 on his knee. Not a shift code, a timestamp for memory. No one opened the door. No one knocked. Wood spoke to wood. When it was done, wood fell silent. Night retreated from the room's corners like tide drawing back to harbor. The blank sheet dried without taking a word. The press breathed, even, resisting the urge to run toward breaking news. Somewhere in the kitchen, a small light rose, the kind found in houses that don't yet know they've lost someone. No one inside needed the name behind the scream. That name would arrive on someone else's page. Our work was to keep the words in this house from making the wood outside any heavier. No speeches, no vows, just one decision that required no ink. Do not print the cry. If anything must be printed tonight, let it be the line at the bottom margin. 3 locks are shut, but the side door never was. That line was enough. For a book, for a life, for a city forced to stare at the seam between this house and the next. The anchor seal lay face down, sightless. The double wick sank, bowing out like a head lowered in respect. The press tilted a hair, the gesture of a period. Margaret drew from her apron a small folded slip she'd kept hidden and laid it beside the blank page. A single slanted sentence, needle thin. Don't look up. No one did. No one needed to. Before the city woke, we reset the table, as if dressing an altar for the witnesses made of things. The correctly tied knot on top, the torn glove below, the half-S leaning by the page, the blind candle upright, the anchor seal face down, the blank sheet at the center. Along its lower edge, the faint emboss caught dawn's light. No need to read aloud. Enough to know each of us had touched one letter in it. Outside, another house's door opened and closed. The side door had done its work. And here, in this room, one hand had been chosen. Not to grip a knife, not to stamp a seal, not to mend the S, but to hold a single page still at the right moment. Tonight, that hand belonged to the keeper of the press.